The Projection Booth podcast is sponsored by Scarecrow Video. Try out Scarecrow's rent-by-mail service. Choose from over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Visit scarecrow.com today.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Thrilled you with The Stand, Misery, The Shining, Carrie, It, The Tommyknockers, and Stand By Me. Now, Stephen King's next tale is brought to television as an ABC premiere event. Imagine you're asleep on a crowded midnight flight, but when you wake up, only 10 people are left on the plane.
Where is everybody?
What's going on here?
No one's driving the plane.
No pilot, no crew, and no one on the ground.
We don't want to panic on our hands, do we?
Mayday, mayday.
There's nothing out there.
What happened to the world they knew?
What do they do? Have a nuclear war?
I really don't want to go down there.
But this is only the beginning.
This place is utterly, totally deserted.
It's really wrong here. Oh my God, look.
Patricia Wedding, Dean Stockwell, David Morse, and Bronson Pinchot. Fasten your seatbelt. Stephen King's The Langoliers.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me once again is Mr. Joe Maddrey.
Hey, Mike.
Also joining us is Ms. Marta Djordjevic.
Hello, hello. Ready to talk about the big picture.
We are looking at the 1995 miniseries, The Langoliers, based on a Stephen King novella and adapted and directed by Tom Holland. The film stars David Morse as pilot Brian Engel and Bronson Pinchot as businessman Craig Toomey. They are two passengers on an unusual flight from LA to Boston by way of the Twilight Zone. We will be spoiling this movie as we go along, so if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen it. We will still be here. So, Joe, when was the first time you saw The Langoliers, and what did you think?
I am a lifelong Stephen King nerd, so I was there for all of the annual Stephen King miniseries that aired on ABC back in the 90s, and I guess this one was spring of 95, so it came after It and The Tommyknockers and The Stand, which is sort of a tough act to follow, and The Langoliers did not follow it particularly well. I was excited. I remember being excited about it because I had read, actually, I think one of the first Stephen King stories I ever read, I picked up 4 Past Midnight when it first came out. I'd only read maybe 1 or 2 Stephen King books before that. And I remember really liking The Langoliers in that collection, especially, I think because I had grown up in a small town where there wasn't much on TV. So we had like one UHF station, and in the afternoons they would play, old Star Treks and Addams Family and Twilight Zone episodes in syndication. And I loved the Twilight Zone. So I feel like I was kind of predisposed to like The Langoliers, which is really just sort of an extended Twilight Zone episode. I remember thinking it's extended pretty far for a miniseries. The material's a little light. I was underwhelmed, I suppose, and I don't think that I have watched the miniseries honestly since 1995 until this podcast came up. So I blame you.
You're going to have to watch it for your next book anyway.
Yeah, well, I'll get there eventually.
And Marta, how about yourself?
No, in preparation for this podcast a few days ago, I also read the novella for the first time as well. And I loved that. I absolutely inhaled it. I could not put it down. So going into the miniseries, I was a bit, worried. It's 3 hours of mid-90s network television. But I also realized if you really lean into it and lean into the pacing, the flat lighting, it kind of weirdly enough works. Like you feel trapped in that eerie dead time with the characters. So I don't know. There's something to appreciate about it, I guess I can say.
I came to this one kind of backwards. I ran across the film Timekeepers of Eternity, and I was like, what the hell is this? Why is there? It was like a still image of Bronson Pinchot in black and white. I'm just like, what is this thing? What Timekeepers of Eternity? I've never heard of this. And started watching it, and I was just like, oh, this is what, wasn't this a TV series? Wasn't this a made for TV thing? And kind of just was like, oh, the Langoliers. Okay. And the only thing I knew about the Langoliers is it's famous for one thing: horrible special effects. And I said, I've never given this a chance. So I said, let me listen to the book. And I bought and downloaded 4 Past Midnight on Audible. And I was so thrilled to have Willem Dafoe narrating this for me. I was ecstatic listening to the story. Strange story. And yeah, we'll definitely talk about the pacing and stuff. I was so shocked that it was like 8 hours long. And there was a point, I think about 6 hours in, where I was just like, well, where are they going to go from here? What the hell? They're back on the plane. They're flying back. They've got this big thing that they're about to go through. How are they going to make this go for 2 more hours? So yeah, it was fascinating. And as I was listening to it, I kept thinking of other things, and we'll definitely talk about that as we go along as well. So now that I've worked my way backwards from Timekeepers of Eternity through other mediums back to the Langoliers, finally watched the Langoliers, and it's like, oh, this wasn't too bad. It is strange. It's a strange movie, strange pacing to the story as well. They cut out a lot of interior dialogue, obviously, when it comes to the series, the 2-part series, 3 hours worth of this stuff. It makes sense that they do, because we don't need to get into the heads of every single character that's on here. But it is interesting to see this whole idea of a bunch of people kind of trapped in a spot, but then they're not trapped anymore for a third of it, and then they get trapped again. They trap themselves on the airplane again, because now they're trying to save themselves. But yeah, it was just an odd way of presenting this whole thing. This what I felt like should have been a short story, but really stretched out. But it didn't feel like one of these Stephen King stories where you're just like, oh my God, would you please just end this thing already? Which sometimes his stories feel like that for me. Some of his full-length novels, I'm just like, yeah, this probably should have been a short story. Whereas with this, listening to the story, I was pretty compelled by it. And I really enjoyed some of the things that were happening with it. It is interesting that he's got the writer character in here. I mean, how many times does Stephen King deal with writers in his stories? And then also the little girl who's blind. And of course, it's like, okay, you've got the person with some sort of malady who makes up for it in another way. Kind of reminded me of like Nick from The Stand, or, any number of characters that Stephen King has written before, where they might be deficient in one area, but they are superstars in other areas. And especially with this little girl and her whole fate that she has. But it's a challenging film. Let's put it that way.
What I found interesting as well is, obviously there's some changes done to the miniseries, but a lot of it seemed lifted directly from the pages. Like the dialogue especially was very true to King's story, and that really surprised me. I wasn't expecting that at all.
That was Tom Holland, who was the writer and director, went into this very concerned about being faithful. I think because by the mid 90s, fidelity to Stephen King was such a big thing with his fans. That's, I think, why the miniseries format was more popular, because you could fit more of the stuff that was in the books in there. And he really does stick very close to the dialogue, but it's kind of inescapable, the challenges of going from one medium to another, the whole apple and oranges comparison. Because what I think really works about the novel or novella, I'm not sure lengthwise which it actually should be classified as, but what works is kind of the inner thoughts of the characters and the fact that you're getting into their heads. And when you really just kind of bring it down to dialogue, it's 3 hours of a lot of talking. It's just, it's theater, most of it's theater. And then they throw in the CGI effects in the last hour, I guess that's supposed to be like a curveball. I was reading in one of the old, I don't remember, maybe it was like Cinefantastique or something, an interview with the producer Richard Rubenstein, who was, he's kind of doing his huckster thing of trying to pitch what this miniseries is going to be. And he said, the log line was like, it's Stephen King meets Irwin Allen, and Irwin Allen did the big budget disaster movies of the 70s, like Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno and The Swarm. I feel like that's kind of misleading because there's not a lot of spectacle in the Langoliers at all. This is not a spectacle-driven thing. This is a Twilight Zone episode. It's very theatrical, and it's almost like trying to be true to the style of a Twilight Zone episode, that it's even kind of shot the same way. It's like very traditional coverage, the wides, mediums, tights, and then like these extreme close-ups with somebody kind of looming into the camera. And it really is an extended episode. And my memory of the Twilight Zone is that in the later seasons, they started to go to the 1 hour format instead of the half hour, and it wasn't as good. So a 3 hour Twilight Zone episode for me is a lot to take.
So at its heart, this is a story of a group of people that wake up on an airplane and they find that all of the other passengers are gone. That includes the pilot, the co-pilot, everybody's gone. And we're left with just a handful of folks. I mean, it's maybe 10 characters. I never actually sat down and took account of them. They all wake up. They find that everybody's missing. They divert the plane from Boston to Bangor. As they're flying, they keep looking out the window and not seeing anything. They're unable to contact anyone at home. They don't know what's going to be there when they land in Bangor, Maine. And of course, it just made me laugh that they divert the plane to Maine, especially to Bangor, because that's, such a Stephen King kind of stomping grounds. They get off the plane. They find that there's nobody there, but then they start hearing this noise that just keeps getting louder and louder. And basically, they just kind of figure out, mostly through the writer character, who's played in the movie by Dean Stockwell, find out that basically the whole world seems to be like deprived of energy, that it's like a twilight, time is passing differently, and they kind of figure out, like, if we don't move, if we don't get back on this plane and hopefully fly our way back, that whatever's happening to the world is going to happen to them. Like, they're going to be depleted of energy. And then, of course, we find out what the Langoliers of the title are, which are basically a made-up thing inside of Mr. Toomey's head, but they kind of line up between his fantasies, his nightmares of his father and this horrible relationship that he had with his father and mother, and they eliminate the mother character. It's just the father in the movie. If they don't move, they're going to get eaten by these creatures, these terrifically ridiculous creatures that really reminded me of, do you guys remember the movie Critters? Reminded me of Critters, because they're basically just teeth and hair, and they just eat everything. And I guess they're how the world cleans itself between one day and the next, and it's kind of a reset thing. And they fly off, and they try to go back through the rift that they just, it's all conjecture. It's all just Dean Stockwell character just constantly like, well, maybe it's this. And everything that he says ends up being true. And he's just constantly trying to figure things out. One of the things I like in the book is that there are several times where different characters will have these revelations. There's a young man, Alfred, will figure out a little bit of the mystery. And then the Dean Stockwell character will figure out a little bit of the mystery. And then even the David Morse character will figure out a little bit of the mystery. And it's just like, okay, oh, well, if we reduce cabin pressure, then we'll all fall asleep because we have to be asleep to go through this thing. And because that's how we made it through the first time. So somebody's got to sacrifice themselves and stay awake so that they can turn the air pressure back on. And meanwhile, Albert is like, oh, well, if we take these things back onto the plane has energy and it hasn't yet been sapped of energy or anything. So yeah, it's just very, very chunked in as far as like on the plane, on the ground, back on the plane. And then there's that little denouement at the end where like time kind of catches back up with them. And by that point, we're down to 4 characters, maybe a few more, because we have lost a lot of people along the way.
For me, what really worked was how little of the monsters, the Langoliers, you actually see. Because going into this, all I knew, of course, was about the CGI. That's what everybody seems to be talking about. But it really doesn't even take up that much time in the film. And it's less about the monsters eating time and more about people realizing they've slipped out of the present. And that, to me, is truly horrific. And then you have King, who literizes that slow decay of meaning, right? The empty airport, the fluorescent hum everywhere. It all just feels like time's corpse. So perfect actually watching it now in 2025 that the CGI and set design look so dated, because it almost reinforces the idea that this world is expired, right?
I do love the concept, and I think it's something that works so well on the page, because really it's a story that's about, so much of the story is about dread, and it's kind of about this feeling of the uncanny. And like with the noise of the Langoliers coming, like all the characters have a different description of what they hear, and they all kind of describe it as something familiar, but the fact that it's something different for all of them is a little unnerving. I can't even remember all the descriptions. One of them says it's like Rice Krispies and milk, and everybody sort of has their own spin on it. And there's just something creepy about the fact that it's familiar and unfamiliar. They don't actually know what it is. They can't place it, and they're trying to come up with some sort of equivalent in their past experience. I mean, they're reaching for that and can't quite come up with it. And the same thing with like the experience of everything being kind of grayed out, that like sensory experience doesn't work. Things taste flat. There's no taste. You can't smell things. You can't. Sound is not really working right. There's something that's not kind of vivid about the sound. Everything sounds a little muted. It's these things that you can describe on the page, where you can talk about somebody's experience of this, their experience of the uncanny. You can, and a good writer can put you in their head as they're feeling disoriented. And I think the trick with a film, going to the different medium, is it's like so much of it is about, can you visualize something, or can you put something on the soundtrack that is that disorienting or that destabilizing in these really subtle ways? That's a really tall order. I feel like instead what they did was say, well, we're just going to say all that great stuff that Stephen King described. We're just going to have them say their, what they're feeling. Because King says it so well in the book, we're just going to make that dialogue, which is this trap that people fall into as Stephen King adaptations. We're going to be really faithful. And by being faithful, you don't recognize that there's something that has to happen when you're translating from one medium to the other. When I was interviewing Diane Johnson about The Shining, and she, is an incredibly brilliant writer, and she said, what you really have to do is come up with objective correlatives for what's on the page. And so instead of, doing kind of extended dialogue about the violent history of the Overlook Hotel, you do something like a visual metaphor of the blood pouring out of the elevator that is just a surreal thing that kind of, smacks the audience out of their comfort zone. The dialogue just doesn't get it done. I just keep coming back to thinking, well, The Langoliers is a play. It's sort of a theater, maybe not even theater of the mind, just theater. That's not enough for me with a story like this. To say nothing of the CGI.
Well, it's like we are missing a lot of these characters' motivations. I mean, when I look at the movie just as the movie, there's very little of the Laurel Stevenson character. The Patricia Wedding is the actress playing Laurel. There's very little of Kate Maberly's Dinah Bellman character. And then the Frankie Faison, who I love him, he's barely present in this movie as Don Gaffney. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, I really would have liked to have known these characters a little bit more, because as it ends up, I mean, maybe we get a little of David Morse, but it really becomes the Mr. Toomey show. And that's fine, but Mr. Toomey, I mean, Bronson Pinchot is playing him at 11 almost the entire time, if not the entire time. And it really becomes all about him and all about the blind girl. Everybody else kind of takes a side seat.
It doesn't even open with Dinah or Brian Engel, which I think the book opens with Brian Engel. It opens, the miniseries opens with Nick. And I thought that was very, very bizarre. And then we kind of see Dinah a little bit with her aunt, and then Toomey, but it was just completely different to the book, which I just couldn't figure out why, especially with Nick too.
I pictured Nick as being a lot older than the actor that's portraying him. And I don't know what that was, if that was Defoe's reading of the character or just, they describe him as basically like a British secret agent, but it felt like he was very world weary to me. So I just pictured somebody a little bit older in my mind, almost like if David Morse and the actor playing Nick had switched spots. I could almost see that, because I can see David Morse being more of like world weary, and also he would probably make a killer assassin, because I usually see him as a bad guy in most movies.
I totally pictured Cary Grant from Charade as Nick. And that's because I also listened to the Willem Dafoe audiobook. And Willem Dafoe, whenever he goes into Nick, he like does his British accent. And it's Cary Grant. It's like, that's what he thinks a British accent. I'm sure, like, I should give Willem Dafoe more credit. He probably doesn't think that that's what a British accent is. He's just like, well, we're doing sort of a, Stephen King's version of Hitchcock here. So I'm going to just make Nick Cary Grant. I'm just going to cast him in that role. But the way he delivers the lines, I'm not going to do a Cary Grant impression, I promise. But if you want to hear a good one, Willem Dafoe, reading The Langoliers.
In his mind's eye, he now saw that angel, moving not over Egypt, but through Flight 29, gathering most of the passengers to its terrible breast, not because they had neglected to daub their lintels, or their seatbacks, perhaps, with the blood of a lamb, but because... Why? Because why? Albert didn't know, but he shivered just the same, and wished that creepy old story had never occurred to him. Let my frequent flyers go, he thought. Except it wasn't funny.
I'm sad I didn't do the audiobook. I feel like I'm missing out on something big here, guys.
He should have been in the movie.
Defoe is amazing, especially when he's reading Toomey's internal dialogue, and especially reading Toomey's father and Toomey's mother. And just Willem Dafoe putting on that voice of like, okay, Craigie Weggy, and all. I'm like, oh man, this is making my skin crawl. Yeah, he is all in. And then, yeah, whenever he talks about the big picture, he like really shouts it at you. It's like, okay, yeah. He earned his money on that that audio book. That's for sure.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, the one thing with Toomey, actually, what I found interesting is that there's, as you were saying, Mike, there's no mention of the mother. And then that almost didn't really work for me, because all that Craigie Weggy stuff is then transferred on to the father, which I don't think that was his nickname for his son in the book. Or maybe it was, I don't know.
Yeah, the whole thing of like both of his parents were terrible, between the father just drilling all of this into him, and like, the Langoliers eat up little boys that aren't committed to the big picture and all this kind of stuff. Like basically the most A-type personality ever, just drilling it into this little boy. And then when he's out of the big picture, or when he's not around, you've got the alcoholic mother who, she tortures him somehow. And I'm trying to remember what it is. Does she tie him up or something?
It's the cigarette between his toes. Or match, maybe. One or the other.
Which kind of plays into the whole life of the matches thing, when it comes to them trying to light the match and not being able to light the match.
I love King's take with Toomey. I saw Toomey as like capitalism's fever dream. Seeing Toomey, it's the most painfully American response to metaphysics imaginable. He's terrified of wasting a second. He's shredding paper to self-soothe. He's literally being devoured by his own idea of productivity. I think it's his dad that says, what is it? Lying down on the job is lying down on the job. So he's screaming that, and it's just hilarious and tragic to me all at once. And I really loved how King described all of that in the book. So, I mean, I'm talking about the book more than I am about the miniseries, but it's something that really stood out to me and really stuck with me.
The latest from the twisted imagination of Stephen King are creatures called Langoliers, who will make their way into your home via miniseries. Their purpose, to turn an ordinary trip into a flight of terror. E.T. bravely ventured to the set in Maine and found our own twisted tour guide of sorts, star of the sci-fi thriller Bronson Pinchot.
How do you feel about Bronson Pinchot? Could we just talk about Bronson Pinchot for a minute? Because I feel like he's kind of the biggest thing in this miniseries. And I went kind of poking around looking at reviews, and he's definitely kind of other than the CGI, Bronson Pinchot is what people are talking about. And it's like a love it or hate it. I mean, some people are really enthusiastic about his performance while acknowledging that it's completely over the top. So it's like, I came away going, well, when does over the top work for the movie, and when does it not? Does it work for this? Because it's such a contrast to, the rest of the cast is kind of they're like, day players on a TV soap opera. And they're just, there's a blandness. And then it's like, he comes in just trying to just wreck shop, basically. I mean, just, chewing the scenery. And it's strange. I mean, I kind of wonder, like, what is Tom Holland as the director? Like, is he sitting back going, this doesn't mesh, but it's bringing some life to it? I mean, what must he have been thinking to just kind of let Bronson Pinchot kind of run roughshod over the whole production like that? Is that a positive or a negative?
Even Pinchot's, not just his demeanor, but just the way that his character is made up, with this hair slicked back. He looks like he's sweaty at all times. And then he's got black circles around his eyes. He almost looks like a member of the living dead a lot of times, because he's pale. He's got the black circles. He's got the hair slicked back. I guess he could also be a vampire. I mean, he does look supernatural through a lot of this. And just like you're saying, he's playing it, to the hilt every single time. I paid for a ticket to Boston. I'm going to Boston. And just like the most unreasonable person. And it's funny because, this is 1995. We didn't have, cell phones with cameras and video recordings and stuff. Now you see this type of behavior. I mean, there was a period of time there. Remember when the guy got ejected from the United flight and stuff, and just all of these like very notorious like ejections off of airplanes. Toomey is right there. Toomey is one of these, what would they call him in 2025? A Karen, just like, my needs come before everybody else's needs. I don't care what anybody else cares. This is my show. I am the main character. It brings that I am the main character energy to every single time he talks. He's just so entitled.
I want a window seat.
Why don't you talk
No. Why don't you talk to the ticketing agent? I only want to talk to you.
And yeah, the only time he's calm is when he's back ripping pages in a magazine or a newspaper or something. Is just constant. That's the only thing that seems to soothe him, which of course we'll talk about more with Timekeepers of Eternity. But yeah, it's such a great little character trait, or major character trait. And I love that at one point, to kind of jump a little bit ahead, he's in an office and they're looking for him, and Albert comes in, and so does the Frankie Faison character, and they look in and nobody sees anything. And then Albert sees the pile of shredded papers and he's like, he's here. It's like his tell that there's all those shredded papers.
It's funny you should mention vampire, actually, because in my notes I wrote down he looks a bit like Bela Lugosi. And I really, really noticed it, of course, in Timekeepers, because it's in black and white and you can really see the slick back hair. But in the Langoliers, I also noticed as time goes on, he becomes more pale, and more than everybody else. It almost looks like he just loses all sense of color. So yeah, I found that really interesting because nobody else seems to.
I guess that kind of fits too with the whole world kind of being sapped of everything, and him just getting more and more pale. Because when he's on the plane and he's screaming his head off, he's turning almost purple at times.
He's exhausted. By the time they get on the ground, he's got nothing left. He's got to recharge.
Can you imagine being on that set when he's doing that? I mean, it just must, he as an actor must have been exhausted at the end of every day, just screaming and carrying on.
I read a funny story about that, actually. I don't know how, methody Bronson Pinchot is, but I guess he was, in the dressing room, whatever, he was rehearsing, he was getting into character, and he got really angry because he could hear people outside talking, chatting. They were being very loud. They were disrupting his process. And he was in trying to get in character as Craig Toomey. So of course he's angry and very big and entitled and all of this. And so he leaves the dressing room and goes out to, chastise everyone. And everybody's kind of crowded around this guy who's, the center of attention. And so he decides this is who I'm going to scold, because this is clearly the problem. The guy turns around and it's Stephen King.
Ah.
So he was very humbled by that, and probably slipped out of character there. Like, I imagine that was a moment where he went more back into like, Balki Bartakamus instead of Craig Toomey.
Yeah, as you were both saying, I wish we got more of the other characters, particularly Laurel, because she's so grounded. She has that maternal instinct, especially in regards to Dinah, because she starts taking care of Dinah. And I think that's a really nice counterpoint to Toomey's mania. So I wish we got more of that, like more of that balance, I guess. Because, yeah, Joe, as you're saying, it's very much so the Toomey show throughout.
I was so confused when Patricia Wettig showed up on screen. I was just like, oh, I didn't know Edie Falco was in this. And every time she shows up, I keep thinking it's Edie Falco. She just looks like such a dead ringer. And I guess it helps that I'm doing a rewatch of The Sopranos, but every single time I'm just like, oh, God, is that Carmela? Nope, that's not Edie Falco. That's Patricia Wettig. And yeah, her story in the book is interesting. This whole thing of like her exchanging letters with somebody that she doesn't really know. And she basically is just trying to cast off her whole life. I mean, she and Toomey are kind of similar in that way of going for it. And Toomey is on this path of literal self-destruction through this entire story. It's interesting how they externalize that at the beginning in the airport when there's the guy chasing after him and he's just like, you lost all this money. He's like, yep, I know. And just kind of marches off. And his whole thing is, and I love the metaphor that King uses in the book of the fish that are so deep that any sort of like change in pressure, like as they get closer to the surface, they'll just explode. And he basically is looking forward to going to Boston and exploding. And I don't know if that means that his whole life is over or his whole life under his father's thumb is over. And if he can finally become his own person, I don't know what his end game was, but I really appreciate that he just kind of wanted to be different and was on that path of coming to the surface and imploding.
Yeah, I also saw Toomey as a bit of a opposite to Dinah as well, because they're both in the same place, and how they're reacting to it seems polar opposite, right? Dinah believes in the Langoliers. She believes in getting them out of this situation where he just completely panics and doesn't think there's a way out. So I would look at them as polar opposites, personally.
And I like the way their characters are married too. When he starts to see, we see as the audience what he sees through his eyes of everyone else on the plane basically being monsters. And you get his head snapping from place to place, and then you get Dinah's head snapping the exact same way in the foreground. That's probably one of my favorite bits in this whole miniseries.
That was surprising, too. I remember I had to rewind as well, because I was not expecting it to look so scary, truly. That was more scary than the actual Langoliers, of course.
And Joe, I love what you're saying when you made a reference to Hitchcock earlier. And I think you were making it more in terms of Cary Grant. But now that you're saying that, this has very much that dynamic of a lifeboat. And, we're going to talk about this a lot as this episode goes on, but this whole idea of like a group of characters trapped, kind of, but like in an enclosed place. And Lifeboat is such a great example of that. I mean, I think we're aiming more for Lifeboat, but I think we're ending up more as Rope, like you're saying, as far as like the play-like feel of this. And it doesn't help Rope that it's all, the quote unquote one uninterrupted shot, which is definitely not. There are cuts as you go along. And then of course, I'm not even talking about the back of the jacket kind of thing. Like there's a couple like literal cuts in the movie. This whole idea of all of these disparate characters being brought together. I mean, I just watched the film Identity 2 nights ago, and I'm just like, what are these all aspects of Mr. Toomey's personality? But no, it's not. They are very real, quote unquote, characters.
It's the minimal sets too. And I imagine that must have been part of what was appealing about adapting this, was that it can be so, contained. I mean, you really just have like the plain set, and then you have, I guess technically you have 2 airport sets, but I think they were both shot in Bangor Airport. The end doesn't look like LAX. I can't imagine they shot that. They just got some exterior shots of LAX. And then even like the shots of the plane in the sky are just CGI. So, I mean, it's really contained. And, again, I go back to like watching it in 1995 and what a contrast that is to The Stand, which was shot, all over the country, had so many, different locations and moving parts. And then the Langoliers is just so kind of small and light by comparison. And where did the budget go? Because obviously these big Stephen King miniseries that were getting these ratings that were like the kind of, the big moment in Sweeps Week, back when Sweeps Week was a thing. Where did the money go on this one? Did it really go to the CGI? Is that what happened? I'm curious actually, because did you both read the story before watching the miniseries? Because I'm curious then what you pictured the Langoliers like in your head. Did you have an idea of what they would look like before seeing the miniseries?
Do you remember in Spirited Away, the little black floofs? So I imagined it as them, but instead of having their cute little faces, it was just teeth. So I imagined them as very fuzzy with feet, because I think Toomey says at one point that they have feet, or his father told him that they had feet. But I didn't imagine them as, I don't even know how to describe them when we actually see them. They're these like floating balls with mouths. So certainly not that.
In the book, isn't there a description that's like bowling balls with teeth?
Oh, yeah.
I think it might have been tempered. I might have seen the CGI. I might have. That might have been somewhere in my head. Like I mentioned, they reminded me of Critters when I was thinking of them. They reminded me of Fizzgig from The Dark Crystal. And also they reminded me, as far as like the mental picture I had, now this is way out there, it reminded me of the testicle monsters that were on Rick and Morty. I think it was the Time Cops episode.
You stole a time-freezing crystal from testicle monsters?
I would have been happy to pay for it, Summer, but they don't exactly sell them at Costco.
That's what I pictured in my head, was like kind of a combination of all those. I definitely pictured them having like little legs running along, and it was just a matter of like how little those legs were, because obviously like Fizzgig, I think you maybe see feet, but he just is pretty stationary. But yeah, those testicle monsters I think moved around pretty well.
It brings the question, what would it look like today? Like, could this ever be done well and actually have them be scary?
I was thinking about this, what I might want, trying to come up with a frame of reference for what they could look like, or something that had worked for me. And sort of two things popped into my head. One was the silver spheres and Phantasm. It's a very simple kind of practical effect, but that always worked. Or I was terrified of those things when I saw Phantasm as a kid, and yet it's so simple. And then the other thing, because they're basically eating reality, the other thing that conceptually popped into my head was the Nothing from the Never-Ending Story. So I was just like, oh, if you could combine those two somehow, then it would work for me. And I think, what a lot of the reviews, at least, were kind of saying is what we end up with instead is sort of these like Pac-Man digital, CGI Pac-Man. Apparently they even, when they were designing them initially, they had eyes, they had like a full face, and then they ended up just going with the teeth. But eyes would have definitely made it even more Pac-Man-ish, I think. So it's probably good they didn't go that route.
I don't think anything could have prepared me for seeing them, because I'm a firm believer, and I don't like watching trailers. I don't like spoiling anything, especially visually. So yeah, once I saw them, I was speechless. I'm still speechless.
I can see why people didn't talk about this movie that much other than the CGI. That was the only thing I was aware of. Like, I even kind of got this mixed up with, I don't know what the plot of the Tommyknockers is, but I kind of got that mixed in here, where I was just like, well, which one is this? Is this the Tommyknockers? Is this the Langoliers? And I think it's just because they both have kind of silly titles to them. And, Langoliers is just such a made up thing, made up by Mr. Toomey's father. Yeah, one of these has bad CGI, and I don't know which one it is, and I don't know which has an airplane in it. And yeah, when I finally got to see them in situ as I'm watching this, and they just keep building up. I was just like, my God, the people in 1995 must have been so disappointed when they have waited for one night's worth of thing and they come back the next night and tune in on ABC at 9:00 or whatever. And then these things show up. I just can imagine America, uproariously laughing at these things because they were just so pathetic. This is like worse than Asylum level creature effects. And you mentioned the CGI of the airplane. I was like, well, that looks decent. That looks decent enough. We'll talk about how, in some of these older things like the Twilight Zone, it's like some of those shots pretty laughable, some of them, but the plane here looks good. But man, oh man, once those things come out and they just do not look like they belong in this world, in this movie, they just look like they're slapped on like it's almost like a Jib Jab cartoon or something. They just have these things in here. It's like, wow, I can see why people don't go, oh, did you ever see the Langoliers?
It was a bummer, for sure. Since we're talking about the CGI, I mean, obviously the Langoliers is kind of the big obvious thing, but what about the time rip at the very end? Because that's sort of the other big thing that I imagine they invested a certain amount of money in and had a lot of discussions about what the time rip is going to look like at the end of the film when they pass through it. I don't think that's as offensive as the Langoliers, but it's also feels to me like they're going for, 2001: A Space Odyssey and really trying to conjure that sense of awe and wonder. And it's okay CGI. I mean, it's undercut too, but again, the fact that they lean so heavily on dialogue, you've got these characters going through this thing that's supposed to inspire awe and wonder, and they're going, it's so beautiful. I'm so happy. I mean, it's like, wow, way to step on the moment, guys. You really didn't trust the quality of the CGI here. You were just like, we've got to explain to the audience what they're supposed to be feeling now.
It didn't bother me as much. But honestly, I think it's the fact that I saw the Langoliers, and then anything that comes after that is fine in my books. So I don't even remember what that time warp looks like. Actually, now that I'm trying to recall it, it's all just Langoliers.
By the time we got to the end of the film, I was just like, okay, at least these aren't the Langoliers. It looks fairly decent. It just reminded me of like a big like abalone shell or something. I almost wish that it had been a little bit more organic somehow. Having a literal rip in time and space in the air. I mean, I don't know what I'm picturing. Like when I read the book or listened to the book, Mr. Defoe described it very beautifully. It sounded great. And yeah, it was definitely a little bit disappointing when I saw it on screen, but it was not nearly as, egregious as anything else. I think the shots of the airplane flying away from it and flying into it, and you just have like that very crisp, clean airplane, and then kind of the colorfulness of the rip. I'm just like, okay, it doesn't look good, but it wasn't laughable, at least.
Serviceable.
Yeah, serviceable is a great word.
Actually, it looked, and I know we may talk about this film later, but I watched Flight World War II last night, and the CGI in the Langoliers is actually, well, not including the actual Langoliers themselves, but the outside shots of the sky and everything, the time warp, that was a lot better than Flight World War II, which came out in 2015, I think.
Very brave of you.
I felt so bad for Ferran Tahir to be in that movie. I was just like, I like that guy. He was such a great villain in Iron Man. He was so great in Escape Plan. What are you doing here?
I couldn't watch it because when you brought it up, of course I always think of the Asylum as like, all right, we're doing the poor man's version of big budget blockbusters. And it's like, okay, do you want to watch the poor man's version of the Langoliers? No, the Langoliers is the poor man's version of the Langoliers. I'm good.
I watched Stalker the night before because I mentioned that to both of you. So going from Tarkovsky's Stalker to Flight World War II was something else. In a way, it was almost nice to have my brain just have that break, that mental break, and just absorb everything that is the Asylum. So.
Yeah, it was amazing to do research on this and to read so many like actual papers about time and time travel, and because it's almost like the time travel takes a side step when it comes to the Langoliers, because it's basically just we somehow slipped into the between time, the liminal space between days. And I don't necessarily know how this works, because it's like as one day goes away, the next day starts, and the Langoliers come in and they eat the previous day is what I'm picturing. Is that what you guys have in your heads as well?
Yeah, I saw them as like a janitorial service.
I was reading so much about time travel and this idea of like what happens when one day ends and the next day begins. And then of course, being in the air, and, time just is so different when you're moving faster than, the earth is rotating, and this whole idea. I always, joke with my wife whenever we take an airplane trip. I'm just like, okay, we're traveling in time. We're going to be there, an hour before we actually left, or something like that. Or like this whole flight is only going to take us an hour, but of course it takes like 5 hours with the time zone differences and everything. Oh yeah, well, we're leaving at 1. We'll arrive at 2 in California. I mean, obviously it doesn't work that way, but so yeah, this whole idea of time and just
that you have to think of time in an abstract way. It's been a long time since basic Western philosophy, but is it like Parmenidean being where everything kind of flows together? And then, this is kind of like the theory behind the Langoliers seems to be more like kind of like the film strip version of time, where each moment is kind of discrete and separate from the moment before and the moment after. So it's like each discrete moment has its own life, and whatever the cleanup crew has to come in when that moment is done, clear the way for the next one, whatever. This is where like you have, again, it's like the dialogue in the story. I think it's the writer who gets to kind of explain all of this conceptually to people, which I don't know, it's interesting. It's really interesting conceptually. Is it scary, or is it just sort of, mind-boggling? Does it pull you into the story, or does it pull you out of the story to get this abstract?
Once the Dean Stockwell character brings up time travel, I'm just like, well, is it time travel? Because not knowing the story whatsoever when I'm listening to Defoe tell it, I'm like, when they land, is it going to be prehistoric times? Is it going to be the future? Like, what actually is going on, below? Because I know when they are trying to raise other people on the radio, there was a mention, like maybe they had a war down below. Like, who knows what's happening, and, one of the most famous Rapture stories that we have in 2025 is the Left Behind series, where, half the population or however many people disappear. And our main character is, oh God, he's got that amazing name, like, Steele or something is his first or last name, the Nick Cage character, or if you prefer the Kirk Cameron character, I guess, if he played the pilot. Anyway, that is, what's happening on Earth, and then does that happen in the sky as well? Because the pilot gets raptured and everything. So I'm just like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when they land? And then it's just this kind of weird in between time. I'm just like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. But I was really picturing something a lot bigger when they landed on that plane.
I mean, it worked better like reading King than it does on camera, but I find this idea of being stuck in slightly the past just so terrifying, so much more terrifying than traveling back in time, to prehistoric time or any other time. And there was that, who is it by? It's by Daniels, I think it is. What happens to the present when it becomes the past? It's an argument of the moving spotlight theory, and I think King really describes that well. It's Daniels argues basically that the Langoliers follow a philosophical model known as the moving spotlight theory, where all moments exist, but think of it as like a police spotlight. So only what's being shown is the now, and everything else is still there, but it's just not. I don't even know how to explain it. You're right, Joe. It's hard to explain, but the theory itself, the way that makes the most sense to me is the moving spotlight, and what's shining bright is the now.
That's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying like the film strip version of time, which I think was something that I first read that Ingmar Bergman maybe was talking about, that like, it's, the light's only going through kind of one frame at a time. And that's, that's the spotlight. That's what you're talking about. And everything else doesn't exist because the light's not on it.
Everything that happens now is happening now.
What happened to then?
We passed then.
When?
Just now. We're at now.
Go back to then.
When?
Now.
Now?
Now.
I can't.
Why?
We missed it.
When?
Just now.
When will then be now?
Soon.
Story-wise, I like the ending. And to me, it sort of does feel like, Stephen King grew up reading a lot of science fiction before he became a horror guy. I think he was a very voracious sci-fi reader. And there's a kind of like traditional sci-fi optimism almost in that kind of sense of wonder and awe at the end about like reality being born. I like that. I think that's maybe for the story, that's what kind of elevates it a little bit above just a Twilight Zone episode, because the Twilight Zone episode would leave you hanging with kind of a twist. And this actually does feel like, a story that kind of comes full circle and you have an idea of where it might end up based on where you've been. And it tries to take you somewhere completely different and sort of thwart your expectations. It's really hard for me to remember how surprised I was when I read the story as a 12-year-old. But I remember really liking it. So I feel like I probably was surprised by that ending and kind of gratified by that ending.
Yeah, I like that whole idea of them catching up to time, and especially in the book where we get to see or hear about the way that color is kind of coming back into the world and that they can hear things before they actually see them. And it's just like, yeah, being brought into it. And the one little kid who's just like, oh, it's the new people. And they're like, is that us? Are we the new people? Yeah, we're the new people. This is great. And there is a denouement in the book that I don't think that we definitely don't get in the movie. And I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes, but it is more kind of wrapping up the whole Nick Hopewell character. Nick Hopewell is the British assassin that's played by Mark Lindsay Chapman. He and Laurel, they fall in love in the period of the story, and he kind of wants to redeem himself. There's this whole thing about how he had murdered some children who were throwing potatoes that were painted like grenades or something. And he needed her to go back to someone and kind of like explain what had happened. And we don't get that at all. I think that's perfectly fine for this miniseries to not have that denouement in there, but
that could be the 4th hour of the miniseries.
Yes, it could. Like her looking up the person and going to visit and all that stuff. They wrap it up really quickly in the book. And I was just like, okay, I could have actually done for a little bit more of like, and here's what this, like almost like a, Animal House type ending. And then this person went here and this person went here and this person did this, and this person was killed by his own troops, those kind of things.
Yeah, the way the film ends was just, I couldn't believe it, that freeze frame of them all jumping.
I was surprised that they didn't do a Naked Gun thing and like everybody else moves, but they're frozen in time kind of thing. I guess that's an opposite of a Naked Gun ending.
They went for the after school special ending.
But yeah, Marta, you mentioned the idea of Stalker, and I was curious how you see Stalker and time relating to the Langoliers.
It made more sense to me when you compare Tarkovsky to King's story, Langoliers on paper, and also Timekeepers of Eternity, less so when you're watching the Langoliers. But let me see if I can fumble my way through this, I guess. But thinking about Stalker while I was reading the Langoliers really helped me take a step back and look at the story in a more abstract sense. Because personally, I've always been drawn to how different artists, either through writing or film, deal with fears that surround the passage of time. And so with the Langoliers and Stalker, I see them both circling around how people behave when the laws of time stop making emotional sense in particular. So with Tarkovsky's Stalker specifically, characters try to surrender, to look at hope, while King's characters in the Langoliers, they strategize. So it's different cultures answering the same sort of existential question. Tarkovsky, he always said cinema was sculpting in time. He has his book as well called Sculpting in Time. And he seems to treat time like clay, so something that still holds fingerprints. And in Stalker, that's why I rewatched it to see if I could make sense of this. There's so many interpretations with that movie, but to me, time seems to slow down when they enter the zone. So memory has weight. There's something in that silence that you can feel. The zone itself, it's filled with decay, but that decay kind of feels sacred. You have that water that's constantly dripping, that abnormal fog rolling in. Like, it just feels otherworldly. And so there's a moment when the stalker and the two men, they first enter the zone, and this really struck me. They say how the flowers are so beautiful, but they have no scent, that they look alive, but something essential is gone. And that's that same uncanny feeling, as we were saying, runs through the Langoliers, where, what is it? The sandwich tastes wrong. The beer is flat. It's the same thing, where things feel or look intact, but they aren't. So these are both worlds that are haunted by absence, let's say, by this idea that beauty and reality can survive in form, but lose its essence. So what fascinates me is about how each world, the world in Stalker, the world in Langoliers, how they react to that loss. So Tarkovsky's characters, they try to slow down, they try to find hope or grace, which you could even compare it to what Dinah does, where King's panic, especially Toomey, he's that corporate embodiment of Western time anxiety. So we're terrified of wasting a single second. So when time stops for him, this thing that he's obsessed with, it breaks his worldview. The way I see it is there are two sides of the same coin here. What King's trying to say and Tarkovsky, they're both trying to survive a moment when time refuses to cooperate, but they just approach it from opposite ends of the spectrum. Stalker's zone is this cathedral where time echoes and gives us hope. Langoliers is, what's the opposite of a cathedral? I guess a warehouse where the echo doesn't exist, right? And then you look at the Langoliers and visually how everything looks, I guess, quote unquote, cheap, or the flat lighting. All of that kind of fits because the world's supposed to feel unfinished. And the most haunting thing isn't the monsters, it's the ambiance of the empty airport terminal and where everything's kind of present but not truly alive. So when I think about it, if you think about Tarkovsky and King with these works of art, they're both just artists wrestling with the same fear, which is that time might abandon us before we figure out what it was for. You look at that and then bring in the other element, which I know we're going to talk about with Timekeepers, but what Timekeepers of Eternity does, it makes that passage of time literal again. So the paper tearing and folding actually sculpts time the way Tarkovsky described. So that's kind of the bridge between the two. You have Tarkovsky's metaphysical patience, King's anxiety, brought to life in Timekeepers. So that's kind of what I was thinking.
I think that's great. Yeah, and I love the whole idea of the flowers not having the smell and the things not having the taste. And yeah, you get into, and that's the thing I love about Stalker is there's not a real clear reason. I know in the book, there's more about the aliens that have come in and them trying to get alien artifacts and things. But I think Tarkovsky, if memory serves, it's been a minute since I've seen it, but he doesn't necessarily play that up. If anything, it's more just like there is something wrong here, and he's not exactly outward about what's going on and, what happens in this place. And the mystery becomes the reason why we want to see what's in there. And it's so minimal as far as I don't remember very many special effects other than a water glass moving, but it freaks you the fuck out.
I just keep going back to Tarkovsky's obsession with time and how he plays around with it and tries to slow it down. And also just faith as well. It really made me think about the Langoliers in terms of faith and Dinah, and why her arc is so moving to me is she's the one character who senses something otherworldly, or I guess we could say holy for the sake of this conversation, in the emptiness. And that's similar to me to Stalker, the character of the Stalker himself and his faith of the zone and the room in the zone.
In the novel, too, Stephen King really does sort of present her as this sort of angelic figure. There's definitely a transcendent quality to her, not just for Toomey, but kind of in the way that King describes her.
Joe, you obviously know a lot more than I do about that, but the whole thing about children is truth seers, right? Yeah, Dinah, her blindness turns that idea inside out. She can't see the world, but she perceives its soul. Third eye that King talks about.
All the children characters in his work in general that tend to have that, sort of a purity that the adults never have.
And that she has that connection with Toomey, that she says, you're going to need him. We're going to need him. Don't kill this guy. And actually makes Nick question himself and not outright gank Toomey. And then is able to see the world through Toomey's eyes, through this madman's eyes. And that for her is beautiful. She's never been able to see before, but now she can see through this person's eyes and can see the people that have been helping her. And like you said, that mother figure, she can actually see her and have that connection, which she wouldn't have been able to do without Toomey. And I think his madness is the key to her entry through his eyes. And I think we just see that, like I mentioned, the whole idea of the head turning and those kind of things seems to be the moment of them really making that connection. Though we see little shots of her like kind of twisting her head, tilting her head when, like, oh, this person passes by. It's almost like she knows what they're thinking or knows this person is going to be important in my life pretty soon.
I think you got to be careful here. This is turning into a really, really interesting and thoughtful conversation, and people are going to hear this and say, I should really go watch The Langoliers. It sounds like a very smart movie. And then what will you have done?
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with an interview with the writer and director of The Langoliers, Tom Holland. It's kind of a rough quality interview. I tried my best to make sure that it sounds pretty decent. Hopefully you'll be able to hear everything. Mr. Holland gave some great insight to the making of the film, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages. Looking for something superior to streaming? A place with more than 5 times the selection available on all streaming services combined? Check out Scarecrow Video's Rent by Mail service. Select from an unparalleled collection of over 150,000 films and get Blu-rays, 4Ks, and DVDs delivered directly to your door. Get in on it now at scarecrow.com and rediscover the wonders of physical media. So you had just done The Temp in 1993, and then Langoliers. When does that project come to you? Is that 94?
I did The Temp, which was not a great experience. Then I did Thinner. And then I got Bell's palsy on Thinner. And he had me to a doctor right away. And I decided the business was trying to kill me. I'd had walking pneumonia on Fatal Beauty. Fatal Beauty had a lot of night shots in it. And it went back and forth every week between staying up. They say a 5-day week, but a 5-day week ended on Saturday morning at dawn. And I did that for however long at Fatal Beauty, and I got really sick with pneumonia. Then, when I got Bell's palsy, it was just at the start of Thinner. I think a couple of days before I started shooting, they had me set up for a cinematographer up in Toronto. He had a private plane waiting. When I walked in and I had half my face was down around my kneecaps, they didn't want to lose the money they spent for the private plane. So they didn't get me to a doctor. They took me up to Toronto instead. And that was a Saturday. So I didn't get in to see the doctor until a Monday. They gave me a shot of something to take down the swelling. And it's too goddamn late. And after that, I decided the business was going to kill me if I kept on doing it, and I said to hell with it. I basically retired. I wrote a collection of short stories called Domestic Behavior, I think, or Untold Tales. And then I wrote Fright Night, and I have a new Fright Night novel coming out with Marta Harbron.
Had you met Stephen King before you made The Langoliers?
No, I haven't. I only met him because I shot him in Bangor, which was his worst because he was trying to bring warmth into Maine. He came down and played a small part in The Langoliers. And that's when I met him. And I don't have the picture anymore. Oh, one of the funniest things I ever saw was while he was waiting, he was sitting in a chair reading the local newspaper, and I looked at what he was reading, and it was the obits. He's a very nice guy, by the way. He's a high school English teacher from like 1968. That's a lot of them, who happens to be brilliant. He's a storyteller. But anyway, Langoliers was a novella. And it was the first story in a book that he had was the collection of short stories, and I can't remember the name.
I think it's 4 Past Midnight.
Thank you. That was it. And I thought it was terrific as a piece of material. And what he had done was he hadn't written prose, really. It was more structured like a screenplay, the storyline. He told it in prose, but the structure which was laid out, I thought was very strong for a miniseries. But you couldn't do it in how many hours was it? Do you remember?
I think 3.
I don't know, it was 3 or 4. Anyway, it was a huge amount of work. Because that was up at Bangor International Airport in the dead of summer at the height of tourist season. And it was supposed to be a totally abandoned airport. So I was shooting around massive summer crowds coming in for the Gold Coast of Maine during the summer. The water worked to avoid them, and it made getting sound, getting dialogue really difficult too. But I had terrific sound people. They did a terrific job. It was easy to adapt because I thought the story was so strong. When I had read it initially, I couldn't put it down. And I don't have that reaction to very much. So I was gung-ho for doing it. There's a great chance for comedy and also for character. It's a moral tale. So now that seems like an episode out of Tales of the Crypt. When I look at it, beginning, middle, and end, it teaches a moral tale. Moral jellyfish gets scooped at the end. The one that I really loved was Langoliers. And then what happened was, I thought it was absolutely terrific until the very end with the Langoliers. And the CGI was just coming in. And Tom Barham, I think, was the name of the fellow who did. And he is desperate to make them seem like they were in the plate. You know, you shoot the shot of the scene, and then you put the monsters in. But the way that was done, the monsters weren't dirtied up, so it was obviously sitting on top of a piece of film. And the producer, Tom Barham, begged him to give him another day to dirty it up, to make it more like it was in the scene. And the producer was too damn cheap to do it. And that was another, God help me. Everybody, so if you get involved with the studio, you got a better chance of not being beaten up for money than if you get an independent production like that. And that was Laurel Entertainment. It was a smaller outfit, and they were cheap as hell. I had a terrific cast. We rehearsed, I don't know. I remember that this was just when OJ was running down the freeway in the white Bronco or whatever it was. Rehearsing all of us were running into the TV to see what had happened to OJ on the freeway. And I had a great cinematographer, Paul Maybone. It's a lot of work. You don't realize that they worked me out those planes moving outside, the actual goddamn planes. I mean, you know how big they are? And I'm sitting there trying to direct them. I think they were being hauled, but those trucks that grabbed them to take you into the loading dock. It was a very difficult and exhausting production, but I was very happy with it, except for the Langoliers at the very end.
How was it working with David Morse?
Terrific. David is a sensational actor. I don't know why he hasn't gotten, I guess everybody knows who he is. But he's so talented, he would have thought that he'd become a bigger name. So I don't know what the story is. He's also huge. He's like 6'2" or 6'3". And I was always intimidated by his size. All of them, I thought all of them were very good. I had been able to rehearse for a good week. For a rehearsal, it was already working dramatically. I did the adaptation too. I knew what I wanted to do dramatically. You learn how to direct lighting. You answer a lot of those questions before you get on the floor. I think it was very successful. Working on TV, get ABC, they're high rated. And then I feel like it disappeared. I don't know if it's ever gotten to 4K.
I don't think it has yet, no.
Well, it has yet. If that was 1993 or 94, hell, that's 25, 35 years ago. I don't think it's going to happen. Where's Shout Factory now that you need them? Hey, Bob Emmer, are you out there, Bob? Bob Emmer is a very nice man who helps run Shout.
How was it directing so many people all at the same time? Those compositions and just maintaining with all of those actors all at once, because it felt like you had that entourage of people in front of the camera so often.
I did it in rehearsals. I told them what I was going to do. It doesn't mean I was able to, because everything, so much of what I was doing was determined by avoiding the crowds. So I couldn't see it that way, but I could shoot them in a corner. You know what I mean? It's a lot of work, but it really cut together beautifully. I remember that. And I was dealing with a live airport and was supposed to be totally deserted. I was out on the runway trying to make planes go this way or that way. And here I was, one small human being with 2 or 3 huge 747s moving around it. I wouldn't do it now, but it was a lot of fun then. Anyway, I'm so happy that you're asking about Langoliers. I'm very proud of it. And I feel like it did very well in the ratings for ABC. And then it seems like it's been forgotten.
Well, it's a terrific adaptation. What you chose to leave in and what you took out and what you added, it all just plays so perfectly. And it's such a tight story.
The story was strong to begin with. I remember probably getting focused a year, and I bought myself a fan that I could put a book on and a pair of glasses and then my computer. And I looked at it that way. All the cast, you know what I mean? We rehearsed it. So see if you rehearse it, and it's a lot quicker to shoot. You don't have to spend as much time with the actors because you worked out a lot of the dramatic problems along the way. And I remember that I ran that in rehearsal, the whole thing all the way through, and it played like a play. Even on the stage, you couldn't stop watching it. Strong piece of material. Stevie King.
I imagine those rehearsals helped a lot too when it came to all the interiors in the airplane, just because that must have been very difficult unless you had more room than it looks like, because it's such a confined space, that set.
You know, they brought, I think, an old plane from the plane graveyard in California, which is somewhere out in the desert. You see it, it's just spectacular. There's like thousands of planes left. They had a plane that they brought out from there to Bangor, Maine, in a hangar. All I remember, and I can't remember how, the floor was plywood. And if I tried to move on it, dolly, it shook. I couldn't move the camera because I didn't have a steady floor. Every shot in that plane had to be fixed. And maybe I got movement handheld once, but it was really, really limited. So much of it was limited in terms of the framing because of the wide airport, huge planes moving outside, plywood floor in the plane was not used. The material was very strong, and I think the cast was terrific.
I always love to see Bronson Pinchot, and just the intensity of his performance was wild.
I haven't seen Bronson for years now, but I loved Bronson. Now, the rap on Bronson is a little bit true. Bronson is such a dedicated actor and so talented. Bronson is brilliant. And I haven't seen him for years, and as a brilliant actor, he's a brilliant person. And he's a collector. Bronson would give his performance to where he was excellent, and then he would keep on going. So it was a double problem. One, it was helping him get to the point where he was really terrific, and then it was grabbing hold of him and saying, stay here. Because if he went too far, it became overacting. And I saw him in New York, and then I lost touch with him. But he also collected antiques. And he knew he had many interests, and he knew deeply about all of them. When you were all are more or less aesthetic anyway. So I have a great, and then I saw he was doing some TV show many years ago where he was going around and rehabbing houses or something. Yeah, I can't remember. I liked him an awful lot, and suddenly he really John.
And then, of course, I love seeing Dean Stockwell, and he's so solid.
Dean had been doing it for so long, I couldn't get him to show up for rehearsals. And you know why? He wanted to play golf. He was a golf fanatic. That's all he thought about. Whenever he wasn't in front of the camera, he was trying to find the nearest golf course. That's what he was like then. And he was, if you go look at his career, if he started as the boy with the green hair, how old was he then? 8, 9 years old? My gosh, what a career. When I was editing, whenever I got stuck for a reaction, I went to Dean because he was such a pro. But if I had a group shot, a 3-shot, or a 4-shot, and they were all listening to somebody else, some of the actors just said, go on. But not Dean. Dean's giving me reaction shots throughout it because he knew that I would eventually be in the editing room and be desperate to get a reaction shot cut away or whatever. And he was always alive and reacting. He never went, oh, I'm not in this, I'm not speaking, get up and do anything. He was never like that. He never had to love. Where you have ensembles. And Langoliers was an ensemble.
Yeah, very solid performances from everybody, including the little girl that was blind.
She had been the lead, I think, in his Secret Garden just before that. I think directed by Agnes Holland? My name? No, I don't know why I'm thinking that.
Yeah, it could be Jessica Holland.
Yeah, but that's where she came from. So she had just come from doing a very big movie. She was very talented. And then, of course, in Stephen's book, see, when she's dying, she's coughing up blood. So I put blood on her lips. And the network, ABC, absolutely had a fit that I had taken a girl that young and put blood on her lips and let her die. Now, I remember that. I remember thinking how horrible it was if they went in it's CG and tried to blot out the parts of blood on her lips. I don't like it.
After the Langoliers, you did Thinner. You were talking about that earlier with the Bell's palsy, but I was curious how that project came to you. Was it, hey, I like doing the Stephen King stuff, or how was that?
I think it was. And I think it was because Lears came out so well. They were shot so well, which I think is an unusual experience for Laurel Entertainment. Which is fly by the seat of pants said, luxury pop. They did Tales of the, and they give Tales of the Dark Side, maybe. Yeah, then, but they immediately signed for Thinner. But Thinner was not a success. I never quite understood why. And I thought it was the ending. It was the moral, the story was moral. The moral of the story was that the moral jelly that people would do things wrong on to switch to the end, which was Billy Howard. And I had Robert John Burke playing, and Bobby Burke terrific actor. We had a public runs a theater down Oceanside, California, and we had I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, we had a cast screening that came out. It was just terrific. And that's when I realized the film now looks to me like sort of an extended version of Tales of the Crypt. In other words, it's a moral story. But the purpose of the story is at the very end. And it feels like that now. But at the time, it was the first fat suit story ever done. And I had Dick, yes, the great effects artist. He started everything. He did the Exorcist. He blew it over with the makeup work on the Exorcist. And he had done the fat suit. And the guy he was bringing up, he now won an Academy Award for Robin Williams' movie where he played a woman.
Oh, okay.
Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah. That was the challenge about me. Was doing the fat suit, which was the first one done, and hiding the seams because that was all padding, but it was made to look like it was part of the body. And especially around the neck, and especially in those days, it was these heavy lighting, it wasn't LED lighting, and you'd sweat, and the edges would start to peel up. And that was the biggest technical problem. My God. Anyway, I don't know. I survived it.
I just have one more question for you, and that was about your co-writer on that, Michael McDowell. How was he to work with?
Michael McDowell is somebody who was not credited enough. He was wonderful. Paul Clive Barker, when asked about McDowell, he was really talented. He was really nice. He wrote, I think I've done more Michael McDowell pieces than anybody else. And he wrote the Tales of the Crypt I did. The first one, Love It From Happening, I think was his. I did 3 of them. Four-sided triangle, by the way, which I didn't co-wrote, I think is just terrific. And I think that's the best of the 3. Michael wrote that. He wrote Beetlejuice. And nobody remembers. Beetlejuice was an original. It was a spec script. So and he did that. I did that Tales of the Crypt that he'd written. I even co-wrote Thinner. And
did he write the amazing stories that you did?
He did, that's it. So I think that makes me the expert on Michael McDowell. He was a lovely, lovely man. And he was big, he was gay, and he was a motorcycle guy. He had all the chains and the leather on and all the rest of it. And I was like, no. But he was really talented and really nice. And then I think he got A's. I remember when I did Thinner, no, not when I did Thinner, I did Fright Night. This is 84. And it started, but nobody was really talking about it. And 2 or 3 years later, when I did Child's Play, everybody was talking about it because everybody was dying. And in my generation, and the generation you had, and the generation below, it wiped out such a huge percentage of talented, creative people. I counted it up once, and I had almost 20 people that I knew that had it, that got it. And in those days, it killed you. And then, then they figured out to keep you going, but you wouldn't want to live that way anyway. I have too many friends who are in the drugs. But that was like something thematic during all of this. That was going on. That was going on when I was doing. And Thinner.
I always wondered if there was a little bit of the AIDS crisis in Thinner, just with the way that the lawyer keeps wasting away, because I saw so many AIDS patients just waste away.
I think it was written before AIDS, but that's why. And I don't know what my consciousness about how conscious I was with AIDS when I did Thinner, but I would have been by that time, because by the late 80s, man, it was wiping out Hollywood. I listen to myself talk and I feel like, oh my God, this is a horrible world I've lived through. So many traumatic experiences. But when you're going through it, you're just trying to survive, you make a living. Those were very difficult years. And yet somehow I kept living. I think everybody did. They had to, but it certainly is a setback for Hollywood until I could miss. I can't now, but back then I could have given you the names and he probably not they did.
You mentioned the Fright Night book. I'm curious what else you're up to.
I wrote Fright Night Origins with Jack Hewlett. And then that turned out to be very successful, actually. You can find it on Amazon. I think all these things are on Kindle now. I combined with a terrific writer called Michael Harbron. By the middle of October, the book I wrote with Michael Harbron will be coming out. And it's called Fright Night and Fright Night What? That's always the goddamn question. Please, what's it called? Let's see if I can find out. Fright Night Hellbound. And Michael Harbron, Harbron, and Tom Holland, and I think you know how to spell that. So it's Fright Night, and it's coming out like in 2 weeks. And I know it'll be on Amazon. And I know it'll be on Kindle, because that's trying to live in this digital world. You already got requests for it, but then there's a lot of requests in softcover, and the collectors want a hardcover, which I would sign, hopefully before I slip out of this world. I've got so many stories that so many of them are grim. I don't want to go into it. I want to be happy. I want to be positive. I want to encourage young filmmakers. I don't know how I got this far in the business. I starved to death for years. I don't know how anybody does it, but they do. A few do. But I can tell you, so many don't. But the creative arts is a difficult way to make a living. It'll be the breakthrough, you get filthy rich, too. There's irony in all this somewhere, but I'm not sure what it is.
If you figure it out, please let me know.
Please, if you figure it out, let me know. But I'm glad I did it all. And at this point, it gives me a certain satisfaction. I'm older at this point. And being able to look back and having you ask me and other people ask me about the movies, it's wonderful. It makes me feel like I did accomplish something with my life. Not all of them were good. There were films that didn't work. And like I told you, nobody ever asked me about Fatal Beauty until you. But everybody asked me about Fright Night and Child's Play, of course. Yeah, I created Chucky. But only known. Anyway.
Mr. Holland, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the fact that you're interested in your talking today. And God bless you, and God bless me.
Where is everybody? They've gone. They've all gone.
Across the boundaries of time.
Mayday, Mayday, this is American Pride, Flight 29, requesting emergency aid.
Something is waiting for you to arrive.
It's coming! Don't you understand?
They are predators.
They are going to chew the eyes right out of your head.
They are relentless.
They're coming for you.
And they are very, very hungry.
They will eat you alive! Alive and screaming!
All right, we are back and we were talking about the Langoliers, and before the break, I promised that we were going to talk about a movie that I feel is better than the Langoliers, but would not exist without the Langoliers. How do you like that sentence? It is Timekeepers of Eternity, which I mentioned before is using footage from the Langoliers, but manipulating it and using it in such a different way. And we're going to hear from the director of that in a little bit as far as his actual process, which is fascinating to me. But just know that it's essentially an animated film, taking a live action movie and making it animated by printing out every single frickin' frame of the movie and manipulating every frame, though it's only an hour long. And I have to say, an hour really suits this so much better than the 3 hours, because we just cook through this. And I talked about how this movie is like the Mr. Toomey show. This becomes the Mr. Toomey movie. And I really appreciated what Aristotle Maragkos was doing with this, and just taking something and transforming it so fully and into something that's so similar but yet so different. I mean, it's not just that he changed the end of the movie, he made it into his own thing, which I found to be just wonderful.
I was completely blown away by this one. I mean, as you're saying, just the concept itself of what he did with printing it frame by frame and all the rips and the folds. But I also thought it was really brilliant seeing a movie that's devouring itself, which is kind of the perfect mirror to what King's story is about. And specifically with those physical wrinkles and tears that we see, it's not just creative for the sake of it. It's Toomey's psyche unraveling, and every crinkle is another breakdown. And I thought that was really, really effective.
The storytelling itself is really strange and disorienting. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier, is like, how do you take the emotional, quality of the story and convey that in a different medium? And you don't just sort of use the words that were there, to say, hey, this is strange and disorienting. You have to actually do something in the new medium that throws the audience off. That does that, because I kept, so many of the transitions and just the way things were framed, frames within frames within frames. It's, it was jarring. It was just jarring watching it. And it's kind of emotionally destabilizing. And I had moments where I was, I guess it's sort of like what I was saying about Bronson Pinchot earlier. It's like, is this pulling me into the story more? It does when it has an emotional effect, but then sometimes it's also like it's pulling me out of it. I'm seeing the artifice of it. But, it's fascinating. There's obviously a whole lot more going on, I think, than there is in the original miniseries. It's much more interesting to engage with. And I think, obviously I love that it's shorter. I also just love the black and white. Black and white can cover a lot of problems, and it kind of covers the blandness in a way of the original miniseries, and sort of changes your expectations. I mean, it puts you kind of in a different headspace. Like, am I watching, a 1950s monster movie here instead of, a 1990s miniseries? I think, this was something that Frank Darabont, I think, did with The Mist as well, where there was like a different cut that was in black and white, and it changes your expectations. It changes especially the way that you judge, CGI and monster imagery, because again, I'm more accepting of, something that may not look particularly realistic if it's in black and white. There is something about that I'm more accepting of. And so, yeah, this was much more interesting for me. And I'd never heard of this, so I'd certainly never seen it before Mike brought it up. And I think in a weird sort of way, it's maybe even, kind of truer to the origin of what Stephen King was doing, which was sort of telling a Twilight Zone story and having that, the Timekeepers has a sharper, bleaker ending. And I think that's, it's more of a horror movie ending. It's more of a Stephen King ending, I think, in a way. Even the Twilight Zone episode, the specific Twilight Zone episode that I think he was kind of drawing on for inspiration, I think has a much more similar ending to Timekeepers of Eternity than to the Langoliers.
Yeah, I much preferred this ending to the Langoliers, the bleakness of it. I'm actually surprised that this wasn't the ending that King went with himself.
Yeah, it is surprising that everything works out okay. Of course, we do lose a lot of people along the way, including Dinah, that symbol of purity, but we have quite a few survivors, and they're so happy and chipper at the end of the movie, and it's like, yeah, no, I love that he reframes it as the message from Dean Stockwell doesn't get through, that they're just like, ignore the person who figures out that last twist. We've had so many little twists of like, oh, well, we'll take the beer back on the plane and it's going to regain its fizz, and the sandwich will regain its taste, and all these things. But really, I guess it's two twists that they remove. The whole idea of you have to be asleep to get back on, get through the thing. And then also David Morse figuring like, oh, we can use the pressure and that'll knock us out, because they go through several things. They're like, well, we can take drugs to do this. Well, we don't know how long those drugs will last. We're not pharmacists. We don't know what type of dosage, what would kill us, what would knock us out for the appropriate amount of time. They go through all of these different things. And then David Morse, like, again, like you're talking about the beginning of the story, which is something had happened to him on a flight from Japan, I believe it is. And they talk about it quite a bit in the short story, in the novella, I should say. And that's finally what triggers it, where he's just like, oh, we lost cabin pressure. We could have been knocked out, and now we need to be knocked out. So let's use cabin pressure. And I think it's so effective. The shot at the end of Timekeepers where you see, I believe it's like the air mask or whatever, like drops. And it's just like, nope, they all disappeared. They were awake. They all disappeared. It's not just Nick who disappears. It's every single one of them disappears. And then you see that slow descent of the plane going down. And that's how the movie ends. I'm just like, that's perfect. I love that. I love how bleak and dire that ending is, that honestly, these people didn't have any right to survive. They went through this rift in time. Yeah, they really probably shouldn't ever make it out of that.
It's that bitterly ironic Twilight Zone ending that they've gone through all of this, and then it's like kind of a slip of the mind that dooms them. And it makes me think, what is the Twilight Zone episode where the guy just wants time to read, and then he ends up in this post-apocalyptic world with the big stack of books, and he's like, finally,
time enough for last. Yep.
But then he breaks his glasses and he can't read, and this is sort of like the twist. It's like, oops, just that cruel irony at the end.
He does such a smart thing when it comes to mixing what's in the Langoliers with other parts that's also in the Langoliers, insofar as like one of the first times that we see Mr. Toomey freaking out when it's on the airplane, we get little tears in the paper, and the way that we tear through Bronson Pinchot's head and see his father. And it's like his father's living underneath that skin at all times. And you see at one point the paper tears another way, the screen, splits, and we've got him as a little boy kind of looking up at the current Mr. Toomey. It is so smart the way that they're doing this. And Joe, I kind of, like you were talking about, like, I see this, the seams at times, and it's like, yes, I see the seams a lot. And at first I was worried. I was just like, oh man, is this just going to be one of those things where you can tell that the filmmaker was kind of getting bored and is just trying some different things? That's always been my complaint. And I know this is controversial, but that was always my complaint about Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola film. There were times where it felt like Coppola is like, I'm kind of bored with this. I'm just going to try some fucked up effects, and like the way that he was like, messing with time and everything in that movie. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm bored too, Francis, and this isn't entertaining me. Whereas with this, I felt like everything had a purpose. It didn't feel like it was just, I'm the filmmaker, I'm going to fuck around. It just felt like, oh, there are actual reasons for this stuff. And occasionally it's like little reminders, because sometimes the film just runs quote unquote normally, and it's just the black and white version of it with this kind of jitter motion that gets introduced because of the different frame rates and everything. And then also the imperfections of the paper and the process itself. I love that. And then you'll get like transitions will be like tears going across the screen, or they might come up from the bottom. There's one point where somebody's on the ground and they like are tapping the ground with their finger, and you see where the paper is moving when they're tapping their fingers. I was just like, this is fantastic. And it kept me entertained, and it didn't necessarily do that thing that you were saying as far as like taking me out of it, because I was made aware of what he was doing throughout so much of this. But at the same time, I was like, oh, this is great. Oh, that's really smart. Oh, that's very clever. It wasn't just like, oh boy, here he goes again with some other sort of effect. It felt like everything had a purpose to it.
Thematically, it works, but also I think there's a kind of like, there's a unity of effects too. I mean, it like establishes a mood, and again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's, if the goal of the story is to kind of keep us off balance, keep us nervous, I mean, I think it does that pretty consistently. One of the things just popped in my head that as I was watching it, and I haven't seen this movie in years, so I don't even know what the connection is here, but I was watching it thinking, oh, I really should rewatch Pi, Darren Aronofsky's Pi. Like there's just something that, again, like the unity of effect, just like a tone, just a kind of dread-filled tone, and we're just going to carry that through. And I don't know. Like I say, it's been so long since I've seen that I don't know what the connection is there, except that it made me want to rewatch that.
Makes more sense than Stalker, I'll tell you that much.
I don't know. You pulled it out, Marta. You pulled it out. That paranoia of Pi and also the repetition of images. I mean, how everything for him is in that Fibonacci spiral, no matter what it is, whether it's the cream in his coffee or, the patterns of things. It kind of, I've never seen, did it end up being a comic book, the whole thing about ants that Aronofsky put together? I mean, it's just, he's got like patterns in nature and how patterns come up. And that was the first movie that ever introduced me to Aphex Twin with the Bucephalus bouncing ball and the use of like a bouncing ball as such an organic thing mixed with the generated sounds of Aphex Twin. I was like, I love this marriage. It shouldn't work, but it works really well. And that whole movie felt to me like a marriage of natural patterns with the artifice of the actual film itself.
Yeah, it's a great soundtrack and a great sound design too. I wonder if Timekeepers could have probably pushed that even further. It seemed like so much of the material, the audio material, was taken from the miniseries, and I wonder, how radically different it could have been if you just said we're gonna go with completely different music and really sort of change the tone, even more dramatically.
Was there any original music in Timekeepers? Because I also only remember hearing what I heard from the Langoliers, but I remember when the credits rolled, it said that there was a composer attached to Timekeepers.
I think there is, but with something like this, in what year did he put that together? Because it wasn't the era which we're in today where you could kind of run things through, AI and have the music dropped out and just keep the audio of the characters speaking. Obviously, you didn't have access to any of the original materials or anything. So yeah, I could see a full replacement of everything, or like even enhancements of things. Like you said, it's so talky that there's very little time for music.
Recut the Langoliers with the soundtrack from the Blair Witch Project.
But yeah, the whole idea of like just that Mr. Toomey's one thing that he does to relax himself is tear paper, and to use that as like the whole premise of the movie to make that your experiment. I mean, it's so smart, so smart. And too often when I watch experimental movies, it's just like, well, why are you doing this? What are you trying to say to me with this? But with Timekeepers of Eternity, I was like, oh, you are really enhancing the story with the experimental nature rather than just distracting.
Clearly a product of personal obsession. I love obsessive people, so.
Glad you brought up Toomey's dad, Mike, because I love that as well. And it's something that I really picked up on, and I was like, man, this is so smart, is seeing his face, Toomey's father's face, pop up in front of Toomey when he's having that meltdown, because it almost seems like a physical representation of inherited time, and the anxieties he had as a kid just shown to us, like the past consuming the present, literally with those rips. In the miniseries, Toomey's, I guess we could consider him more so campy, but here everything we see is tragic, and I think that's thanks to the texture and the paper that we're seeing being just this sort of breakdown of all of that. The paper's is as anxious as he is. So I think that's really effective and completely changes the tone.
Look, it makes it so that the theory of time isn't just linear, it isn't just before and after, it's layered, that even the present moment has texture, has depth, has different layers.
We were mentioning that spotlight theory or the film strip. It's literal here, is it not? Yeah. which I think is cool because it just takes it a step further to King's idea.
All right, we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with an interview with the director of Timekeepers of Eternity, Aristotelis Maragkos, right after these brief messages.
Welcome to Heist Club,
where we lay out the blueprints for some of the strangest, boldest, and most unbelievable robberies of all time.
From mysteries unsolved,
to flawless plans,
to split-second mistakes.
Like the $19 million last job pulled off by London's very own version of The Expendables.
Or the robbery that made the Mona Lisa the most famous painting in the world. Like the Thomas Crown Affair, set in 1911 Paris.
But also less sophisticated. And no Pierce Brosnan.
Sorry, Todd. We cover bank jobs, art lifts, diamond scores, all the stuff Danny Ocean's crew would be jealous of.
I'm Todd.
And I'm Jesse.
Welcome to Heist Club, real-life capers that inspire movies, mysteries, and time in prison.
Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts.
And follow us at Heist Club Pod on all your social media apps, including Letterboxd.
Tell us about your favorite heists, what you would have done. Hypothetically, of course.
Listen in and join the club.
Before we start talking about Timekeepers of Eternity, I want to know a little bit more about you and how you got interested in filmmaking.
I think like everyone did the mistake to watch too many films when I was young. But my actual path was after school, I studied architecture. And through studying architecture, I find my way towards filmmaking, towards animation. And then I went on to study film, worked for a bit as a production designer, and then moved on to directing. I directed commercials and making my own films, so like short films, and that slowly moved into different things.
So where did the idea for Timekeepers of Eternity come from?
The Langoliers was playing on Greek television when I was very young, quite often, like for the span of a couple of years, and it was the first kind of film that I asked my parents, can I stay up late with my sister and watch it? I was quite young, and in Greece it didn't play, it played as one, so it didn't play in 2 nights till it started. And with the commercials, the break for the news and all that, it went on for 5-6 hours. It was so late, but it was incredible because I remember it as the first kind of scary film that I stayed up to watch, and it was very scary to me. It was very ingrained in my head. Growing up, I used to talk about it a lot, but I hadn't seen it like a decade later, and I revisited it, and it wasn't the memory that I had of it. So the Timekeepers came by, can I figure out the memory that I had, the emotion or reaction I had of the film? Can I reproduce it? Can I find it? Can I, like an archaeologist, can I discover it within the footage? So that was the initial thing. And the technique, the experimentation just came out of the plot of The Langoliers, came out of the character of Mr. Toomey, who is obsessed with time, but also calms himself down with ripping paper. He was the most vivid memory that I had of it. And the film was centered around him, but also gave the materiality that the Timekeepers have.
What was your memory of the movie? How was it different than what we see in the longer version of it?
As a child, you watch films and they impact you in different ways. The emotions are heightened, or you're more engaged with the details that become more important. And it is a plot-heavy story, but it's the pace of it, the pace of telling the story and where it focuses and how it distorts in the ensemble of characters. The narration of it, the way to tell the story, I found a bit scattered. Basically, I didn't have the same emotion watching it. And I'm not saying the Langoliers are bad. The Langoliers are great. I loved it as a 12-year-old, and I gave it so much time just getting into it. There is something there. I think it's great. And the Timekeepers, to me, is not an alternative. It's just something different, something that I made, and luckily was perceived very well from genre audience, Stephen King fans. So it had a life of its own, which is great.
How did you actually do the film? From what I understand, those are printouts of the different frames, and you animated it frame by frame?
Yeah. So first I edited down from the 3 hours to a tighter story that was centered more around Mr. Toomey. And then I did it linear. I was printing out the frames in black and white, which is the cheapest paper, the cheapest ink. And from that, I would animate the paper and then take a picture of it. Each frame is like a collage that I made in reality. Take a picture, put the pictures in order. I also worked on it in a linear fashion, so I started from the beginning and finished at the end, or in the majority of it. And then I didn't go back to correct. I did it blindly, although I can do digital animation and follow with onion skin, follow what I'm making. It was a bit more old school that I wasn't checking what I'm doing. I was doing sequences. And the process was for me to inhabit the madness of Mr. Toomey, to be overwhelmed by the amount of paper that I have to control, holding the narration, the visual narration within my head. Having small stacks of paper, so each shot, and then I would stare at them for a while, for a long time, longer than you'd think, and then eventually I would have in my mind what I need to make, and then I would get to making it. And hopefully because you spend that much time, I get better as an animator towards the end of the film. The film kind of benefits from it, so it starts more simplistically simple in the ideas that it can do with the material and how it interacts with the plot, and it goes more and more complex.
Even just the printing out of all those frames, do you export all that in Photoshop and then print out each frame that way? Like, how does that go?
You break down the film into frames and then you print frames. I've printed so many. I used to print in batches. I was doing my PhD at the university, so I was using the facilities there, so I had like major discount. And then getting big boxes. The process was getting the boxes, then I would stamp them with a hand stamp, so like a rotary stamp, so each one has a number, so if I lose them I can put them back in order, and that would get me my first kind of looking at the material, and then separate them into shots and start making the sequences, which changed a lot. The edit was mainly just to get the material that I would use as grounds, but then on the actual animating process, it would change a lot the way to tell the story.
And then are you doing 30 frames a second, 24?
No. I was doing the animation is 12 frames per second. So it's 12 frames per second, and I think I've used all of the shots that Mr. Toomey is in, and that was the soft rule that if Bronson Pinchot is in it, I'm going to use it, and then the rest would resolve around that.
And what are you actually shooting with?
It's just a simple DSLR camera. So it's like a very simple setup of basically photographing books. So with two lights and a top shot camera, and I used my table to make whatever collages I'm making and then take a picture.
The result, the effect is just amazing. And I love how you've got different, I don't know if I would call them movements, but there are different techniques that you use throughout the whole film. There's one section where you start to, I imagine, put yourself in the film where we can see your hands actually manipulating things. I love when it breaks down into that particular area.
Yeah. And again, that has to do with Mr. Toomey manipulating Bronson Pinchot, manipulating paper. So my hands manipulating paper, it's a reflection of that. And me as a creator, or Mr. Toomey as inhabiting his own mind space. It all has to do with creating this a nightmare, or in a way making the terror of the Langoliers more real.
And then I really appreciated the end of the film where you pretty much redid the effects.
It's infamous for its effects, although I never really minded the 3D Langoliers. But because for me, the paper was so important, the resolution, the beast of the story, but also the resolution of the story had to be directly linked with the paper as material. I went for it.
And then I love that you actually changed the end of the film as well.
At the end was the toughest for me. I did many tries. It was the hardest decision. Different tries because it's a question that can you resolve? What happens when they go through the rift awake? And can you give that space? And I did try something different. And then it was restarting the film. They were going into a different space. And then we were going to a different film. And the plot didn't need that. So I gave them what I thought was the more fitting ending for the travel.
And then I love the effect that you give it with the slowdown of the frames and just showing us a few as it counts down almost.
Almost the same words come from Dean Stockwell's character, where time counts down, weaving down. I'm interpreting what's in the story. I'm reading it and then giving it my own explanation visually.
Yeah, that's the thing, is it feels so personal, and it almost feels like I'm looking in on your thoughts as I'm watching your version of the film.
That's great to know. And hopefully from a point onwards, it's not that I wasn't trying to make an experimental film. So it ended up being a longer film. Usually these kind of experiments for films are like short films, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because after a while you're tired of the technique, or the technique doesn't have anything else to offer. For me, it was the technique isn't used to tell the story. So the important thing for me is that you engage with the story. You can engage with what I'm making as a technique, as a craft, but the more important thing is that you engage more with Mr. Toomey, that you feel the weight of time and the Langoliers chasing and all that.
Once you got everything in the camera, how much adjustment did you have to do for the soundtrack itself?
You're editing through shots, and I never had like an open soundtrack for the dialogues. Everything is mixed down, what I was using. So then I worked with a sound editor and a musician that are good friends, and would try to reinterpret that and mix it through. And Amulets wrote the music. He's really good. He's working with tape loops and cassette tapes, and so very analog looping and understanding, repetitions of time. And that's his craft, and he understands it more than me. And I thought that was fitting to interpret a story that's trapped within time. And he got it at once. We didn't have to discuss much. And he engaged with the material as it is, as a soundtrack, and added layers to it that I think give it this depth. But also a very entertaining and a process was the sound design. Also for me, because it was the time where I had company. I was working with someone else. Everything else, the visual part is just me. And then towards the end, with the music and the sound design, I just had a bit of company, which was nice.
When did you actually start the project, and when did you finish?
It took a couple of years. We premiered in 21, so in Fantastic Fest, and I think it was at least 2.5 years, but it wasn't my only thing I was doing in life. It did overlap with the pandemic, all these things, which gave time, but for me personally, it overlapped with having a baby at home, so put the baby to sleep and then you can work for what time it is, work nights, and then go back to work and other things. But I worked on it intermittently for at least, it must be 3 years for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was wondering if this was your pandemic project, but it only overlapped a little bit, I imagine.
Yes, it wasn't the pandemic project, but it did overlap with pandemics. All the ending, all the Langoliers, when they appear, that was all pandemic to me, which was more labor intensive, and it was great because I had more time to do it.
As a person who has used found footage and repurposed footage before, did you have any problems with rights or anything around repurposing somebody else's material?
I didn't have problems, but the Timekeepers of Eternity exist within fair use of copyright, or within that. The Langoliers have been online on YouTube forever. No one cares. It's a piece of forgotten, and no one cares of the people that made it, of the producers that might still have the rights. So I knew it existed out there, but also working with found footage for artists is you take a stance towards material. Whether you make something new, whether you repurpose something, whether we need something new, or can we find stories and importance and meaning in things that are already out there by changing them. I never looked for the rights. My purpose was to make it without waiting to see for trouble or for success. So the purpose of it was just to make it.
Did you ever hear from Tom Holland?
No. I've heard from Bronson Pinchot, which he's really nice. And that's the only one that worked on the film that I've heard from. and no one else has contacted me, or I've tried to contact them, to be fair. What I've made is from admiration for everyone's work. The Timekeepers exist because there is something important for me in the original material, in the performances, in everyone's work, in the craft that everyone in the crew has put into it. So I appreciate that, and I try to elevate it into something new.
Were you able to attend the premiere?
No, that was pandemic. Unfortunately, I wasn't in Fantastic Fest, so I couldn't do much traveling while it was premiering. So unfortunately, I didn't travel with the film, had to meet everyone. And that's a shame. On the other hand, I got really many messages of love, of people that watched it, which was indeed great to know that there are peers out there that they can, filmmakers, but also audiences, Stephen King fans, which was the first kind of audience because it premiered within kind of a community of the genre. Then moving to larger audiences and getting distributed. It has distribution from AGFA in the States, and then it had kind of weeks here and there where it plays in cinema, and it did really well in festivals, so I'm not complaining.
Did you ever get to see it with an audience?
Yes, but only in Europe. Yeah, you know, I see it with an audience, and it's great. I love it because they have reactions of finding something funny and something finding serious, which in my mind can be different, but you follow the vibe of each screening, and that's great. I never had a kind of complaint of an audience not being engaged to it, which is what really makes me happy.
Where can people actually see the film?
The film is available online now for free. It's on Vimeo, it's on YouTube. And because I had many messages of making some kind of a physical medium out of it, because as we discussed, copyright, Blu-ray, DVD wouldn't cut it. I've gone the more bootleg kind of a way of having something, which is VHS, old VHS tapes, Timekeepers on it, as part of it, and then you watch the rest of the film that was there originally.
I think that's really a smart idea, and especially the degraded quality of VHS, I imagine adds to the experience of seeing that animation in that way.
I cannot tell. The first time I made it and I watched it on a CRT TV, because it's so close to how I watched it originally, I think it's the best way to watch it. Like, it's great in the cinema, it's great to see with more people, but for my 12-year-old self, VHS on the CRT is the better way. But of course, I understand most people don't have VHSs, most people don't have like any more of these type of screens. That's fine. Luckily, there's a lot of people that collect things, or that's still within the VHS community, which is quite large. They like to see things like that. So it's an option that is out there if anyone is interested. For me, it's interesting that I can also get the ripping of the paper into the real world, because each VHS comes with a case, NTSC comes with a paper case, or the PAL come with a kind of a plastic case. I can play with the original covers and my cover of the Timekeepers, and kind of each of them has tears in it, which I think is also good.
Is this version closer to the one that you had in your brain as a 12-year-old?
I don't know. I think trying to find the closest one was the beginning of kind of the adventure. Then when you engage with it, I obviously engage with it as an adult, as an artist, as someone that makes things, and then I invest myself at that time. And that's the best version I can create at the time. If I could time travel and go back and ask myself, there would lie the answer. But we have to be cautious of time travel, as the Langoliers teach us there.
What have you done since Timekeepers?
I've made a few shorter animations. One is called Kafka's Collection of Porn, which is again a fictional take on Kafka, the author. I've completed my first normal feature, which is like a fiction with actors. So you get to play with everyone, be with a bigger crew, which is doing festivals now, which is also great, a completely different experience. And a million other projects in process. And hopefully I will have some of them that engage more with paper and kind of the genre will catch up, and soon I can spend more time with myself ripping paper.
What was it like working with actors for you?
It's great. Each story requires a different, to me at least, it requires different approach and different styles. The Timekeepers are a paper animation found footage because that's what the story required from me. The story that I have, which is called Beachcomber, the film, which is a completely different story. It required me also to open up and work with the crew, and that was also great and fun. Each of them is fun in a different way, and at the same time, also a nightmare, like a nightmare that you engage with in a stressful but very creative kind of environment.
Mm-hmm. Where's the best place for people to keep up with you and your work?
You can find me on my website, which is aristotelismaragkos.com, which is my name, or find me on Instagram, or there's a website for the Timekeepers on VHS. You can find me online and text me and email me and I'll respond, or I'll try to respond. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. This was so nice talking with you.
Thank you for your time.
We are back, and we were talking about the Langoliers, and we've made several references to the Twilight Zone. Of course, I'm a big fan of the Twilight Zone 1985, and there was an episode of that this reminded me of. But science fiction stories set on airplanes, not a new thing, and probably is almost as old as air travel itself. I don't know, but for sure it was very ripe for science fiction and very ripe for TV science fiction. So yeah, there is quite a lot that we can talk about as far as inspiration for the Langoliers. And I think the most obvious one is the 1959 Twilight Zone episode, The Odyssey of Flight 33, which has a airplane going back in time and some amazing dinosaur effects. I mean, at least Timekeepers of Eternity kind of fixed the Langolier effects with what they were doing, but I don't know there's any fixing this effect, but it's so quaint. I love this whole idea of these claymation dinosaurs that we see in but it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun going back and watching a lot of these movies and TV shows that I felt kind of inspired the Langoliers.
Yeah, I wonder if King is sort of famously terrified of flying, and I wonder if that comes from watching early Twilight Zone episodes. You think about like the, William Shatner and the Something on the Wing. And actually the other side of the fog is directly referenced in the novel, in the Langoliers, because one of the characters talks about, that old Twilight Zone episode where they see the dinosaurs down below. And I think that, King would have been at the right kind of impressionable age, certainly when that aired. There's a story that he wrote it's never been published. I mean, it's basically juvenilia, but it was written, I think, between 1960 and 1963 that he wrote this collection of stories with one of his neighbors and friends. And the collection was called People, Places, and Things. And these were some of the first stories that Stephen King wrote. And if you read them, they're basically like, you can tell what he was watching on TV. You can tell like, all right, well, there's an episode of The Fugitive and there's a Twilight Zone. And, you can kind of see all of this in there. And there's one story that's called The Other Side of the Fog. It's a really short story. It's like half a page. He was young and he was just kind of riffing, I think, probably just on the Twilight Zone episode. There's this character caught in a fog and wondering if he's the last person alive because he can't see anything. And he comes out of this fog bank and sees like a vision of the future, like a futuristic city. And he freaks out, runs back into the fog. On the other side of the fog bank, he sees an angry brontosaurus. So, this is clearly the Twilight Zone inspiration. And he goes back into the fog, and the story kind of ends. Stephen King, young, whatever he would have been, 10-year-old Stephen King's ending is sort of the end on like the sound of the footsteps of this guy running through the fog. And so if you hear the footsteps, help the poor guy out, I think is the last line. I definitely think that he saw that episode of The Twilight Zone, The Odyssey of Flight 33, and just kind of stored that away, for years and years and years until he sat down and finally wrote The Langoliers.
It really is interesting to me how similar they are and how mundane the horror is. It starts with just competence and, pilots reciting numbers, trusting their instruments, and then everything unravels. But when it does, they're still just thinking about the fuel gauge, not any sort of philosophical questions. It's just that sort of procedural anxiety like the Langoliers, where people who are trained to control what's going on, suddenly realizing that time doesn't play by their rules. So I thought in that sense, it's a perfect little ancestor to the Langoliers.
I was really happy watching a film from 1961 called The Flight That Disappeared because, well, first off, it's got that great atomic age thing where you have these 3 scientists on this flight, and they're all going to the Pentagon and, we're coming up with this better bomb, and because you've got this part and I've got this part, we could combine these things and make this amazing bomb and, wipe out everybody. And the flight itself is hijacked by basically aliens, right? Or people from the future, I think it might be. And they're like, don't make that bomb. No, you're not going to, we're holding you here until you agree to not, basically. But that we've got the guy who jumps out of the plane or falls out of the plane, and then his blind wife. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. We've got this whole thing where she's like, where's my husband? Where's my husband? I'm like, okay, this is Dinah. This is the origin of Dinah. And this whole thing of like the people on the ground are just like, what happened to this flight? Which is totally different from the Langoliers. We never get the ground control because they disappear, because they aren't with them as the flight disappears. And with this flight, they are gone for, they land on a Wednesday, but they were actually supposed to be arriving on a Tuesday or something. So they have a whole 24 hours of missing time. And only these 3 people seem to realize that something bad had happened. And I'm trying to remember if they even remember what went on, because I know for sure there's also an episode of The Outer Limits that we'll talk about that the people didn't remember what happened while they were like in this period of missing time, which also always reminds me of the X-Files, and Mulder always asks, did you experience a period of missing time? But yeah, I thought it was great. And it's one of these like hour and 10-minute movies, sci-fi, dangers of atomic war type of thing. Looks really good in my opinion. So super serious. It's not quite 0 hour serious, but it's still pretty darn serious. And yeah, I was tickled watching this film.
I'm sad I fell asleep at one point watching this. I know, not for too long, because I remember it was, they were on the plane, and then I fell asleep, and next thing you know, I was like, is this 12 Angry Men in a wormhole? Like, what's going on?
But that's just like the characters. The oxygen deprivation got to you, knocked you out. If you're not a nuclear physicist, you cannot be awake for what happens.
Speaking of that, the lack of oxygen, I thought that was also another similarity to the Langoliers, albeit in the Langoliers, it's done on purpose, intentionally, where here they pass out due to a lack of oxygen, but still, it's there.
I love the image of the old scientist guy hanging out by the open door of the airplane, and they just have this calm conversation by this open fucking door. It's like, we're not going to talk about pressurization whatsoever here.
This one was also just a treat for me to see just the interior of a plane in the early 60s, that cushy lounge area for drinking and smoking.
Everybody's smoking. That was the thing I loved about the Odyssey of Flight 33 as well. The pilot's just smoking up in the cockpit. I'm like, all right, cool.
They needed that ad revenue.
Also those tables too. I'm kind of upset that we don't have those today, because instead of being on the seat in front of you, they kind of attach. They look like those little laptop tables that you can sometimes bring.
Having a lounge area? Oh, yeah. What a luxury. Why are things worse now than they were before? Wouldn't you think we'd go the other direction and it would be so relaxing to be on a flight rather than just crammed in like sardines? Did you get a chance to watch The Premonition from The Outer Limits?
Yeah. Oh, I did. I thought that one was also just, again, a great ancestor to the Langoliers. It makes me wonder. I mean, I would say King was probably inspired by it. I don't know. Joe, what do you think?
So I watched a few of these a few weeks ago. I'm trying to remember which one The Premonition was.
The Premonition is the one where it's the test pilot and his wife, and they both kind of slip out of time. They wake up and everything in the entire world is frozen. And
right, but it's moving forward in little increments, small. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It takes almost like an hour for a second to pass or something. They go back to the base and they see their daughter and they figure out that she's going to be run over by a truck unless they figure out something to do, or one of them can sacrifice themselves and stay behind. And then there's also that weird creature that is a person that was also affected by a time slip in the past, and he's been stuck there for I don't know how long. I was surprised that didn't come to more, and that was the thing. I've never been a big fan of The Outer Limits. I always felt like they missed the mark, especially compared to The Twilight Zone. And the thing that didn't help for me is exactly what you mentioned when we first started recording this, is the Outer Limits were a lot longer than the Twilight Zones. And when the Twilight Zones got to be an hour, they dragged like crazy. Outer Limits, most of the episodes that I've seen, I'm like, God, if this was half as long, it would be twice as good. But I thought that The Premonition actually moved pretty well.
The most interesting part was that sort of limbo man, like what was the story there? I mean, that's the real sort of, horrific tragedy. I mean, it sounds a little, callous, but I think it was much less invested in whether or not they were going to save their daughter than what is the deal with this guy who's basically like, trapped in purgatory is the only reason that they don't get trapped. The torment, it's like a story of characters being caught in a time loop, just conceptually, that's so terrifying. The idea of just, there's no escape. I think they even say in the episode, there's no death. You can't die here. That's probably the scariest thing in the episode. I want an equivalent of that in the Langoliers.
This feels like the most literal interpretation of that idea of the film strip and time as a physical medium. So yeah, I agree with you there. That is the scariest part of this.
With that character who was lost in time, it reminded me a little bit of the the flight that disappeared, and the idea of like somebody else being there. It is so scary to me when that guy in the flight that disappeared kind of walks out of the fog, talking about the fog, walks out of the fog, is just like, yeah, hey, I'm not going to let you do this stuff. And, here I am judging you. And I thought for sure, like, this guy that was showing up in The Premonition was something similar. And this whole idea of, I don't know why he's afraid of fire, especially because you said he can't die, but he's afraid of fire, and like, I'm going to light this lighter and it's going to scare you away. I felt like maybe if they just went to the base one time, it would have been a little bit better, but they go back twice, I think. And it's just like, yeah, you can move this a little bit, but yeah, I thought it was pretty solid. And yeah, like you say, I would really like to explore more of what this guy's thing is. And why didn't you, try to attack the guy and take his place, and so you can come back out of that time loop?
Yeah, there's a whole other story there for sure. Were the shades in Hell and Dante, were they afraid of fire? Is that, or am I just conflating Dante with like Richard Matheson?
You might be right. Yeah. One other that I thought, of course I thought about Le Jeté and the whole idea of time and time travel and everything with that. And also that it takes place at an airport on a runway, some of it. And that for me, Le Jeté, oh God, it's just so beautiful. It's almost, for me, Le Jeté almost seems to speak more to Timekeepers of Eternity, with this whole idea, we're talking about captured time and this idea of using still photographs to tell a story in a medium that is essentially about moving pictures, but you're using still pictures to tell this story. I'm not going to be able to properly talk about Le Jeté in a few minutes' time because I could probably dedicate like a few hours, if not days, to discussing it because it's so great. And then you get into things like 12 Monkeys and other things that have taken from Le Jeté, and it's just like, oh my God, this is so great. Again, a David Morse performance in 12 Monkeys. It's great that he shows up in that. It's almost redemption for his Langoliers character. But yeah, I love that film, and I love the way that it, again, plays with time and time travel and this whole idea of fate. The fickle finger of fate hits harder in Timekeepers than it does in Langoliers because really, like I was saying, there shouldn't be an escape from this stuff. Everybody should die. It should be more of that cynical Twilight Zone ending. And Le Jeté, like, it's very much like a occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, French film that gets translated like directly, just picked up and taken into the Twilight Zone. Serling almost could have done the exact same thing with La Jetée.
Yeah, I'm so happy you included it here. And same as what you're saying, that was the first thing that struck me is how much it reminded me of Timekeepers of Eternity, Marker freezing time, Maragkos shredding it. They're both just kind of confronting even cinema's morality itself because you have those, it's photographs, it's frozen. And then you have the blink, which is my favorite moment of the entire film. It's the moment that time remembers itself. And I remember the first time I watched La Jetée, I gasped at the blink. I couldn't believe it. And now this time on a rewatch, I thought to myself just how cruel it is because I knew how the story was going to end. And it just reminds you that illusion of motion is just that. It's an illusion. I love this film. I could also talk about this film for hours.
Still, I mean, as a romance, it pales in comparison to the romance between Nick and Laurel or the romance between Albert and little Bethany.
Yeah, I guess you're right. La Jetée, whatever. Who cares? And then I was really glad to, Marta, when I brought up Goke Body Snatcher from Hell, that you just vibed with that. And you're like, oh yeah, any chance I get to talk about that movie? And I was like, fuck yeah, because I only saw that recently for another podcast that I was on. I was just like, been waiting to see this, finally had the excuse to see it, was so happy when I got to see it. And the only reason really why I brought it up was the idea of these people kind of, again, select group of people trapped on an airplane or on an airplane, weird shit happening. I think they talk about like a big flash or like the aurora, kind of like the aurora, how they talk about that in the Langoliers. Again, any excuse I get to talk about this movie as well.
It's incredible. Yeah, I watched it for the first time last year and immediately I watched it again the other night. And I think that where the Langoliers has that quiet unease, this is just a moral meltdown. It's just the opposite. The sky is bleeding red. That's even commented on. Also, I read somewhere that's where Tarantino got the idea of, what is it, from Kill Bill, is it?
Yeah, the airplane, right?
I heard that it comes from this, but that's an aside. But yeah, so you have the sky bleeding red. The passengers themselves, to me, all look like stand-ins of corruption. So you have the politicians, the arm dealers, the profiteers, I think there are as well, just like a pressure cooker for humanity's rot. And in that sense, it actually kind of reminded me as Japan's wild cousin to The Flight That Disappeared. They're similar in that sense, where those characters as well were also morally corrupt and they're being judged by these higher powers. I don't know what they are in The Flight That Disappeared. Maybe also aliens, or yeah, I don't know what they are, but in Goke, they are aliens. But it's also kind of a judgment that comes from within the characters too, because the aliens go into, what is it, their foreheads, and they kind of become the person. I think it's an inverse of the Langoliers. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. Instead of a dead world drained of color, this one is too alive. Hysteria, color, noise. Also like a very, very apparent anti-war message as well.
Yeah, well, especially at the end when they kind of go away from the one big set they've got the set of the airplane and then they've got this cliff that takes so much of the rest of the action. But when they get away from that area and you see what the rest of the world has become, it's kind of like I was saying, as they're flying, it's like, well, what if there was war? What if something was happening on the ground? And here stuff is happening on the ground. Like there's this whole idea of, an alien invasion. Oh, and just for the record, Kirk Cameron played Buck Williams and Brad Johnson played the role that Nick Cage played, Rayford Steele. So you cannot get a more manly name than Rayford Steele. And then for me, one of, my favorite shows was the Twilight Zone 1985. We did a whole podcast series on that called Dreams for Sale. And it definitely was diminishing returns as the series went on. But one of the better episodes, which I think was an early episode, was one called A Matter of Minutes, which was based on a Theodore Sturgeon short story called, I think Yesterday Was Monday. It might have a longer title about it's a man who wakes up, he's gone to bed on a Monday night and he wakes up on Wednesday morning because Tuesday was skipped over. This is the short story. Tuesday was skipped over because it wasn't built in time. And so rather than, it's kind of the inverse. It's the inverse of the Langoliers insofar as we get to see the people who build the world rather than the creatures that tear apart the world. And we get to see Adolf Caesar as like a foreman who's in charge of building the world. And we see, Alan Arkin waking up, and I can't remember who plays his wife in this. And they get to see like this half-finished world. And it's kind of like, I was talking like main character vibes, right? It kind of feels like the whole idea of like, everything in this world is built for me. Everybody else are just like stand-ins and players and that kind of stuff. It feels like, oh yeah, I'm going to leave my house and I'm going to see the people that are actually building the world that I'm about to enter into. Nothing exists. You're talking about the spotlight effect. Nothing exists except for what I see. And here's Adolf Caesar like building all of these things with his crew just in time for, Alan Arkin to, come downstairs and see his living room or go out to work and see his car and those kind of things. It's kind of great because they're all dressed in like these blue suits. You don't see their faces. They're just blue head to toe. It's a simple premise, but that was the thing I liked about Twilight Zone 85 was a lot of those segments were odd times. This is 16 minutes, just perfect amount. Don't give me any fat. Just give me all the meat.
So you're saying that each minute of time is a different place?
That's right.
Why?
Why what?
Why does time work like this?
Because that's the way it works.
But we've been so hard on the CGI Langoliers. You're really being very lenient with the Blue Man group, guys in blue spandex as our Langoliers. Just pointing that out.
Okay, I will cop to it. I agree. But it's a simple premise.
Did you see the episode when it aired in 1985?
I did, yes.
So see, you're probably at a more impressionable age, and you're not as maybe judgmental of the cheap visuals. Blue spandex is dazzling.
Well, and then Adolf Caesar's a foreman. You can tell because he's dressed in yellow instead of the typical blue, and he even gives like a little computer-guided presentation as to how time works. So, yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun. Yeah, it worked for me.
Are they blue men in the Theodore Sturgeon story?
That I don't know. I've never gone back and read that story.
Why blue? I wonder if that was just well, it's in the story, so we have to do it, or if it was just, well, we got all these blue spandex suits flying around from some other show, so let's just utilize that.
I just can't believe that was Alan Arkin. When you said that, Mike, that blew my mind. I didn't even realize I was watching Alan Arkin the whole time.
Yeah, this is pre him in Northern Exposure. Wasn't he in that with like the long hair and the cap, right?
Did not recognize him at all. I was probably too focused on the Blue Man Group.
And I did start to watch Into the Night the other night, the Netflix series, which I am now, after watching the first episode, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to watch the rest of it, or I'm at least going to try to track down, here's another pronunciation, the old axolotl. That's like the little creature, right? That was the name of this 2015 Polish sci-fi book that it's based on. And it was an interesting concept. It's this whole idea of the sun. Now, I'm not spoiling anything because this is the first episode and they set this all up. the sun is killing everyone. So basically this Italian guy hijacks a plane and they're just in the boarding process. So again, limited amount of people, small group on this plane, all from various backgrounds and everything. And he's like, we need to go west. Like, I know we're supposed to be going from, this is set in Belgium, we're supposed to be going from Belgium to Moscow, but no, we're going to turn this plane around and we're going to go west, and we have to stay in the dark as long as we can because the sun is going to kill us. That's like the first episode is them going from Belgium. They try to land in Iceland. They see absolute chaos on the ground. They backtrack to Scotland, which I know is going the wrong way, but they still land before the sun comes up. And basically that's where the episode is ending. They meet some Scottish guys, and I'm just like, ooh, I don't trust these guys. I don't trust why they're still there. So I'm like very curious where this is going to go. But that was a very fascinating concept. And again, one of those where I'm just like, okay, group of people on a plane, great premise set up, and I'm just excited to see where they go with it.
You may have sold me on this. This was one I didn't get a chance to watch next to all these other ones. But yeah, I want to check this out. I think this whole exercise has taught me that I enjoy watching terrifying things happen on planes, on TV.
Yeah, only on TV, not in real life, please.
You have given us a lot of recommendations for in-flight viewing for our next trip, I think.
Yeah, didn't they used to cut stuff out? The scene from Fight Club?
Panic the customers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's a audible version of this in English. There definitely is one in Polish, but yeah, hopefully I can find a nice English translation of the old axolotl. And then, yeah, I'm glad that you bit the bullet and watched Flight World War II, which as soon as I heard the title and saw the premise, I was like, what was that? The whole thing like back in the 80s where we kept doing time travel with boats, like the Philadelphia experiment. And there was another one with like Martin Sheen, I think, where a battle cruiser like went back in time and prevented Pearl Harbor. I was just like, that was a thing, right? Like, are we now doing movies of planes going back and preventing World War II or fighting in World War II? I didn't make it that far into it because, like I said, I saw Ferrante here and I was just like, no, I don't want to see him in a movie this bad, because I think I also saw the Asylum logo and was just like, yeah, no, I'm good.
I was trying to think, how can you possibly connect this to all these other things that I watched? And I mean, I guess you could say, obviously, it's on a plane. The Bermuda Triangle is mentioned, as it is in the Langoliers. That's kind of it. The last Asylum film I watched, I think it was actually Sharknado. I don't think I've seen more than that. It was bad. It was entertaining though. I mean, nothing could have prepared me for the halfway point where you hear, "Let's hijack the plane and kill Hitler," verbatim. So it was shocking.
I just remember watching whatever their Pirates of the Caribbean ripoff was, because I was working on a book with Lance Henriksen and he was in it as a pirate, and it was pretty bad.
As I mentioned, the CGI was at some points worse than it was in the Langoliers, so that's saying a lot.
Yeah, that is saying something. Plus, you have to have the period costumes and oh boy.
Well, not actually a lot. That's what I found interesting. Is they're not interesting. Just I don't even know what I thought. But 95% of the movie is on the plane, and then whatever's on ground was maybe just 2 costumes or 3 costumes. You had 2 from the Allied forces, and then a man that was manning the telephones or tapping into all of that, but he was a member of the Gestapo, which, I mean, why would he be specifically doing all this low-level stuff? It was funny. It was funny.
Was like 90% of it digital too, that there were like the props and everything else? Because this is what I remember Lance telling me, that they showed up on a beach and it's like the actors on a beach with a few pieces of wood, and he's like, well, where's the boat? Oh, we're going to CGI that in later.
It was bad. And everything is, I mean, if you see the Nazis, it's not 1 small flag, it's like 5, just in case you miss it, to make it very clear. Yeah, so thank you for that, Mike. Good palate cleanser for me.
Quite a difference from Tarkovsky, I'm sure. Final thoughts around the Langoliers before we wrap up?
I guess CGI aside, I thought there was something oddly charming about this. But I think that's also in part due to how much I love the story. King's writing, I think if it wasn't for that, I probably would have gone into this liking it a lot less.
Joe, how about yourself?
I bring way too much baggage to any Stephen King adaptation. I've spent way too much time thinking about adapting Stephen King and writing about adapting Stephen King. And I don't know, I guess one of the questions that was sort of popping in my head as I was thinking about this is like, is the Langoliers the worst or among the worst of the Stephen King adaptations? Because some of the other ones that I think about, like Dreamcatcher, is terrible, on a really big budget with some really, significant actors.
A horrible story, though, too.
It is. It's a bad book. It's like to watch it crash and burn is kind of more fun, I think, than watching the Langoliers. Stephen King, I remember referring to the original Firestarter as tasteless. He thought it was a really bland movie, and he said it was like eating cafeteria mashed potatoes. That's kind of how I feel about the Langoliers. That's my final thought.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with a preview for next week's episode right after these brief messages.
Banned since 1975.
She answered only with her initial, O.
Submit to the passion.
What we have to do is get tears out of her.
Submit to the pleasure.
You remain constantly at the disposition of anyone who wishes to use you, the way he wants, whenever he wants.
Submit to the story of O, the first ever screening on British television. Now showing exclusively on U-Direct Films.
That's right, we're going to be back next week talking about the story of O. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts for this episode, Marta and Joseph. So, Joseph, what is the latest with you, sir?
Since I just invoked Lance Henriksen, I guess I gave myself a little segue here. The biography, the authorized biography that I co-wrote with Lance many years ago, which I think we talked about on the projection booth many moons ago.
You even brought Lance along with you.
That book has just been republished. It was a limited edition that came out in 2011 and then sort of, disappeared and can only be found for high prices on eBay now, except that Harker Press has just put that book out again. So that is out in the world. Ironically, I just got back from Bangor, Maine a few days ago, doing some research on the third volume of Adapting Stephen King, which will cover adaptations of Cujo, The Dead Zone, Firestarter, and Christine. So hopefully I'll have that out next year.
You are right there in that golden age, as opposed to the golden years.
That is cinematic brand Stephen King established right there with because all those came out within a 6-month time period or something ridiculous.
And Marta, how about yourself? What's new in your world?
I just wrapped up coverage on the Vancouver International Film Festival, October 12th, and then I dove straight into this. But recently I published an essay on Paul Vecchiali, a French filmmaker who's been largely forgotten in the West until Radiance Films recently restored Rosa Rose Fil Public. So that was a real labor of love to highlight his work and career because, interestingly enough, there's barely any information on him online in English. No books published in English either. So that's live on rewindandrevive.com. And now I'm toying with the idea of seeing if I can pitch a screening or multiple screenings of his work here in Vancouver. But in the meantime, Rewind and Revive is my main home, both publication and podcast. And that's all focused on film history and physical media.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to support physical media and get great movies in the mail, head over to scarecrow.com and try Scarecrow Video's incredible rent-by-mail service, the largest publicly accessible collection in the world. You'll find films that are entirely unavailable elsewhere. Get what you want when you want it without the scrolling. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.